Everyone has dreamed of having an incredible secret life. Think about it. It's that same classic formula where the calmest, most harmless guy in the room turns out to be an absolute killing machine. Back in our childhood, almost nothing captured that energy as perfectly as Rurouni Kenshin. All it took was the opening theme playing on TV for any kid to grab a broomstick and pretend they were wielding a reverse blade sword. But the truth is, if you take off the nostalgia glasses for a second, you'll realize the core of this anime is completely unhinged. It's not just the noble journey of a legendary assassin seeking redemption. In practice, we're watching a bunch of freeloading, unemployed misfits crashing at a stressed-out young woman's dojo. The show has everything: bandaged terrorists trying to take over the world, shameless psychopaths who take a beating like it's nothing, and a pacifist protagonist who swears he won't kill, yet still sends you straight to the ICU with multiple fractures. Today, we're revisiting this red-haired legend, an epic journey about leaving behind a bloody past and trying to survive without paying a single cent in rent.
Sir Ken was wonderfully heroic when he saved me. Right.
We meet our red-headed wanderer drifting through the streets of Tokyo until he bumps into a girl named Kaoru. She immediately accuses the homeless guy of being the legendary assassin, Batosai the Manslayer.
There was a swordsman in Kyoto who was called Batosai the Manslayer. It was said that he was undefeatable.
However, once she notices he's carrying a reverse blade sword specifically designed not to slice anyone, she figures this wannabe pacifist couldn't possibly be the legend she's hunting. Out of nowhere, screams echo through the air. This useless girl rushes off to face the supposed assassin, only to get instantly wrecked and saved by our drifter, who carries her unconscious body back to her dojo. When Kaoru wakes up, she finds the wanderer preparing breakfast with the help of two random little girls. After one bite, she realizes he handles meat way better than she ever could and begs the hobo to move in. Later, while the redhead conveniently walks into her room while she's bathing, he asks about a student with a dislocated left thumb. Kaoru throws a fit, defending her father's dojo's honor, and tells him to kick rocks. The next day, our heroine discovers the killer is actually Gohei, a bitter ex-student who raids the dojo with a gang of extras to tear the place down. Just as she's about to kick the bucket while preaching that swords are for protecting life, the redhead kicks the door down. He throws the truth in her face. Swords are literal tools for murder, but admits he prefers her childish delusions. Gohei's gang tries to attack, but they get folded faster than a bad Wi-Fi connection. The redhead finally reveals he uses the Hiten Mitsurugi style, crushes Gohei like a bug, and proceeds to dislocate the fingers on the villain's other hand, ensuring he'll never hold a sword or tug his own rug ever again. Kenshin packs his bags, but Kaoru swallows her pride and begs the hobo to stay for good, guaranteeing him a roof over his head for free. While our redhead and his new owner stroll through town, they catch a 10-year-old brat named Yahiko snatching an old man's wallet to give to a friend. Instead of calling the cops, our protagonist pats the juvenile delinquent's head, praising his attitude. Feeling his ego swell, the kid tries to rob the redhead himself, but Kaoru shuts it down. The wanderer lets the kid keep the change, which brutally offends the boy's samurai pride. He chucks the wallet at Kenshin's head, claiming he doesn't take pity from anyone, just like you rejecting help from your friends.
What do you think, that I'm a fool? You think I'm so pitiful that you can treat me that way?
We find out the mini pickpocket is actually a slave to a generic Yakuza outfit forced to steal to pay off a fake debt left by his dead parents. Inspired by the redhead's words, he decides to quit organized crime, and the mobsters laugh in his face. Meanwhile, the main duo is enjoying a nice steak dinner when Kaoru decides to play savior and rescue the boy. She bets her own freedom on a game of dice with the thugs, and thanks to the brat's cheating skills, she wins. Obviously, the gangsters aren't about to lose to a girl, and a goon named Gasuke beats our resident damsel in distress with zero effort. The mob boss orders the kid to be tortured, but Kaoru uses her own body as a human shield. Just as the goon is about to slice her, our hobo bursts through the wall out of nowhere. He tells the crew to let them go, but Gasuke tries his luck and takes a reverse blade hilt to the throat so hard his head hits the ceiling like a satellite dish. The mob boss pisses himself and agrees to let everyone go. The ungrateful brat still claims he didn't need help, impressing the redhead, who conveniently dumps the problem on Kaoru, telling her to train the crybaby at her dojo. The vibe at the dojo is worse than a landfill in the summer. The new brat is making Kaoru's life a living hell, calling her ugly and refusing to swallow the toxic waste she dares to call a meal. He makes it clear he only wants to learn how to crush people and couldn't care less about her life-saving philosophy, making them both hate the redhead for putting this cursed duo together. Meanwhile, our protagonist is peacefully buying tofu when he runs into the sword police, a legalized gang that mocks his limp, inverted blade before laughing their way out. In the meantime, the chief of police knocks on the dojo's door hunting for the Batosai, sending Kaoru into a panic as she rushes to warn the hobo not to return to the only roof he's got. In the city center, the corrupt cops decide to intervene in a local crime, demanding the execution of a thief, the shopkeeper, and his daughter just for breathing wrong. The mini-thug Yahiko tries to be a hero, talks smack to the cops' faces, and gets miserably beaten, landing himself on the VIP execution list. Just as the kid is about to go meet his parents in the afterlife, our redhead appears, promising free humiliation. The entire police force tries to rush the drifter and is decimated in the blink of an eye. Their leader uses his super special fencing move, only to be swept away like trash with the rest. Suddenly, a government big shot named Yamagata shows up. Instead of arresting the redhead, he reveals they are old war buddies and begs the protagonist to take a real job with the police. But being a dedicated hobo, the redhead refuses the steady paycheck, emphasizing that he'd rather play hero without killing than go back to being the state's meat slicer. Seeing the wanderer's level of heroic madness, the brat finally decides to become a decent student. A rookie powerhouse named Sanosuke spends his free time beating up extras with one hand while lugging a ridiculously oversized sword in the other, clearly overcompensating for something. Meanwhile, our troop of slackers heads to a restaurant to stuff their faces with meat. The peaceful meal is interrupted by a band of thugs disguised as political activists who throw a massive fit, culminating in one of them hucking an object straight at the redhead's neck. Instead of dodging, the hobo just takes the hit to save Kaoru's hot-headed face from being ruined, proving what a total simp he is. When the waitress gets hit by the thugs, Sanosuke appears to play the glass cannon hero, crushing the gang leader with a single flick of his finger. He gets a real thrill from the protagonist's humility, and even tries to challenge him to a duel, but the pacifist declines. The big guy leaves, sporting the word evil on his back like a goth teenager craving attention. What no one expected was that in the shadows, that useless bald guy Gohei has resurfaced like a cockroach that survived the raid, crawling back to hire Sanosuke in hopes of finally taking out the redhead. Thirsty to defeat the revolution's greatest swordsman, the wielder of the colossal blade shows up at the dojo and forces a fight at the front door. The protagonist dodges the swings with the ease of someone swatting a fly, but the boredom is interrupted when two random kids stumble into the scene. Keeping his alpha male honor quota, Sanosuke holds back, refusing to swing his giant blade in front of women and children. He bails before the climax, leaving the redhead with the certainty that a massive headache is inevitable. As tension at the dojo reaches critical levels, we discover the big guy with the attitude is carrying abandonment trauma from when his old group was made the government's scapegoat. His mentor was executed and Sano was tossed into a river like trash to ensure he'd survive. Now, blinded by a grudge, Sanosuke wants to vent all that repressed frustration by beating the redhead to a pulp. The fight begins, and the brute proves his only real skill is taking a non-stop beating. He tanks critical hits that would kill any normal human with his forehead, soaking up impact like a masochistic sponge. The redhead unleashes a machine gun volley of strikes on his chest, which only lights a fire under the giant's ass. Suddenly, that piece of recyclable trash Gohei tries to shoot the protagonist like a coward, but Kenshin deflects the bullet with his sword and is knocked back. Taking the opening, the bald guy takes Kaoru and Yahiko hostage, only for Sanosuke to slam the weight of his blade onto the traitor's leg, making it clear that absolutely no one is interrupting his fight fetish. Wanting to end the circus, the protagonist spins his sword and snaps Sanosuke's colossal weapon right in half. Even with his pride wounded and his big tool broken, the meathead refuses to stay down. Having no patience for sword fighter therapy, the redhead ignores the blades and ends the debate with a perfect punch to Sanosuke's face. After a cheap moralist speech about no longer being a government lapdog, the protagonist makes Sanosuke realize they're both just idealistic softies. The big guy finally hits the dirt, passes out from pure cure exhaustion and miraculously reappears healed at the restaurant days later, beating up the same useless gang as before and deciding to stick to the Redhead's crew as the team's newest unemployed freeloader. A psychopath with a straw hat and demonic eyes decides the laws of biology are optional and starts slicing everyone up using a paralysis technique that leaves victims frozen on the spot, making him public safety's ultimate nightmare.
Die, insect!
Meanwhile, at the dojo, the gang is forced to choke down Karu's radioactive cooking, proving that surviving her kitchen takes more guts than facing street thugs. Their digestive peace is shattered when the chief of police knocks on the door, begging the red-headed wanderer to babysit a fat politician who's on the hit list of this magical serial killer, now identified as Janae. When the assassin invades the building looking to vent some lungs, he uses his piercing gaze trick and leaves Sanosuke and all the guards completely frozen and weak-kneed. Kenshin charges in furiously, breaking the paralysis through sheer spiritual willpower, and slices off the villain's ridiculous hat. Janae has a nostalgic orgasm recognizing the skills of the legendary Batasai, but quickly gets deflated when he realizes the redhead has shrunk into a soft pacifist who'd rather preach sermons than slit throats. Frustrated that he's not facing the wild monster he dreamed of testing himself against, Janae leaves the scene fuming. He warns that he'll only come back to play shish kebab when the redhead gets his killer instinct back. Knowing he's poked the devil, the protagonist packs his bags to try and take down the lunatic solo. Karu desperately chases after the hobo to make sure he doesn't disappear forever, shoving her blue hair ribbon into his hands like a contract of blind loyalty. Unfortunately, the cliché soap opera scene goes sideways when Janae reappears from the shadows floating on a boat, kidnaps the hothead, and sails away smiling, leaving a formal invitation for Kenshin to swallow his morality and awaken his old assassin self if he wants to see his sweetheart breathe again. The hot-headed Kaoru is tied up, while the edgelord in withdrawal smokes a cigarette, throwing it in her face that the pacifist redhead is actually a meat-grinding machine. While Sano and Yahiko play detective reading the protagonist's goodbye note, Kenshin arrives at the scene radiating pure hate, the vein in his forehead nearly popping. The fight starts off even until the villain pulls a dirty trick out of his hat, slashing the redhead's shoulder with a cowardly back attack, making Kaoru scream like a broken ambulance siren. Frustrated that he isn't getting beaten up enough, the psychopath uses his heartlock magic to paralyze the hostage's lungs, giving her exactly 5 minutes to live unless the protagonist fully unlocks his killer instinct. Threatening his unconfirmed girlfriend is the reset button for his pacifism. The red-headed hobo deactivates family mode, activates the demon of the revolution, and caves in Janae's face with a strike so fast it breaks the sound barrier and humiliates the villain's dignity. The psycho is completely turned on by getting thrashed by the legendary manslayer and buffs his own strength using his sword as a mirror, a level of narcissism bordering on insanity.
I am undefeatable! I am invincible!
But at the moment of the final clash, Kenshin surprises him with a double penetration tactic. He draws the blade but slams the scabbard mercilessly into the clown's arm, ripping his ligaments and crushing his bones in one go. With the villain at the tip of his blade, the redhead is a millimeter away from tasting the enemy's life. However, Kaoru decides to use the power of cliché shown in love, breaking the lung spell through sheer willpower and screaming for the protagonist not to dirty his hands. Disappointed that he won't be penetrated by the redhead's blade, the villain decides life isn't worth living without that fatal finish, dramatically stabs his own heart, and kicks the bucket with a smile. The protagonist picks up the pieces, returns the blood-soaked ribbon to Kaoru, looking like a used maxi pad, and promises he'll never cross the killer line again, at least until the dust settles. A mysterious, smoking hot brunette named Megumi is running like a marathoner dodging debt collectors, while Sano loses his shirt gambling with friends and finds out his pal checked out due to an opium addiction. Out of nowhere, the woman crashes the game thirsting for help, clings to Kenshin, and draws the fury of some incompetent goons working for a low-rent mobster named Konryu. A ridiculous dwarf throws spiral darts at the group, promising to pierce the woman's legs in a non-consensual way. Kenshin and Sano find the guy's audacity offensive and send him flying out of the room with a literal slap. Back Back at the dojo, Megumi decides to work her charm on the redhead, calling him hottie, which makes Kaoru fume with jealousy and beat the crap out of the protagonist, even though he was a passive bystander. The doctor mocks the sweaty girl's face and rubs up against the hobo to mark her territory, but the flirting is interrupted when the Oniwaban group troops arrive to ruin the mood. It doesn't take 2 minutes for a pyromaniac fat guy cosplaying as a gas tank to burst through the wall, puking fire at everyone. Sano tries to tank the human flamethrower and gets his face roasted. Kenshin then spins his sword like a ceiling fan to block the fire, neutralizing the threat in a heartbeat. Sano takes a deep breath, buries his fist in the fat guy's mouth, making him cough up gulps of flammable oil, and KOs the human trash can with a kick to the chin.
So what now? You're out of tricks, right?
This fight isn't over yet, go!
To make matters worse, the weird dwarf from before returns and tries to stick a poison dart in the girl from a distance, but the brat Yahiko tries to play hero, jumps in front, and takes the needle straight to the vein, dropping stone cold. The villains bail, swearing revenge, and Megumi takes charge of saving the kid, but accidentally drops some suspicious packets from her pocket, making Sano realize the hot brunette is actually Walter White in a kimono, and the mastermind behind the drug that killed his friend. The brat Yahiko wakes up perfectly healthy, proving that bad weeds never die from a cheap dart. Meanwhile, Aoshi concludes his goons were humiliated and easily deduces the red-headed hobo is the legendary Himura Batosai. At the dojo, Megumi tries to buy local sympathy by feeding the gang her soft, sweet rice balls. Everyone swallows her balls with such gusto and pleasure they almost forget their problems, until Sano decides to play feds and pins the woman against the wall, demanding an explanation for the drugs in her pocket. Cornered, she confesses she's the cartel's head chef, forced by the suit-wearing mobster Kanryu to manufacture opium after her wonderful family of doctors was wiped out in the war. Knowing the risk of her past tainting the dojo is huge, she falls like a sucker for a street trap set by the masked spy Hanya. Taken to the mobster's presence, Megumi swallows her disgust when the trash threatens to turn Kenshin's home into a giant bonfire if she stops mixing the chemical powders. Yielding to the blackmail, she forges a dramatic note saying she's moving back to the countryside, packs her bags, and heads meekly to the slaughterhouse. What she didn't expect was to run into Sano playing the grumpy guardian in front of the mansion, telling her to stop acting like a suicidal martyr. The sentimental advice moment is torn apart by a buffed-up gigachad named Shikijo, who hurls a monstrous iron ball at them. The brute rips off his clothes to show his steroid gains are on point, and promises to shatter every bone in the brawler's body. The two engage in an intense exchange of sweaty grappling, where Sano takes more of a beating than a punching bag, taking headbutts and being used as a ragdoll. Even with blurred vision after taking so much punishment, Sano grabs both of the Muscle Mountain's wrists and punches the spirit out of him with a crushing blow to the face.
What was that you were saying again? Something about being hard-headed and what scrambled brains look like?
While Sano celebrates his triumph bathing in his own blood, the ugly dwarf Bashimi reappears like a cockroach, grabs the illicit doctor during the distraction, and vanishes inside the walls. Kenshin and Yahiko land too late just to confirm the disaster, and the group vows to storm the gate and rip the girl out of there by brute force. The red-headed hobo's squad invades mobster Kanryu's mansion, handing out punches and flying kicks to useless goons. Inside, Megumi tries to pull a knife on her own boss to end the cartel, but the masked spy Hanya intercepts the play. Seeing his army of security guards hitting the asphalt with absurd ease, Kanryu panics and tries to buy our protagonist's loyalty by throwing inflated numbers in his face like a rejected sugar daddy. The redhead responds by slicing a solid stone pillar in half just for kicks, warning that he's taking the girl back through unbridled aggression. While Kanryu has a tantrum demanding immediate protection, the supreme leader and dark emo lord Aoshi appears to put the mobster in his place, making it clear he only wants to crush the legendary Batosai to prove who has the biggest sword in town. Aoshi locks Megumi in the observatory upstairs with a small knife as a gift, giving her the friendly suggestion that she should slit her own throat before being tortured by her boss's cruel whims. At the entrance, Kenshin bumps into Hanya, who launches a pathetic optical illusion using stripes on his outfit to make his arms look incredibly long and thick. tricking the redhead's vision. But Kenshin enters a tight defensive stance, calculates the perfect distance, and lands a scabbard blow straight to the masked man's face, shattering the disguise and revealing a face that looks like it was French kissed by a blowtorch. Without wasting time, the redhead KOs the crispy goon and keeps climbing. Thinking he's all that, the furious duo reaches the top floor, and Sano decides it's a great idea to attack the emo leader all by himself. Aoshi rewards the stupidity by crushing the buff guy's spine with a single blow to the neck, putting the poor guy back in the toolbox in 2 seconds.
I see.
Now it's one-on-one. Aoshi draws a short defensive blade and mixes steel with martial arts at such a brutal speed that he turns our protagonist's face into a gym punching bag, beating him until he hits the floor, coughing up pools of bitter blood, proving this mob's rabbit hole goes way deeper. The beating continues without breaks, and Aoshi rubs his superiority in the protagonist's face, reminding everyone that blade size doesn't matter when you've got top-tier technique. But the red-headed wanderer finds a miraculous opening, shortens his own swing by holding the blade with his bare hand, and slams the pommel straight into the emo's throat. Irritated by the sheer audacity, Aoshi launches his ultimate spinning attack, slicing through the air and slashing across Kenshin's chest. Everyone holds their breath, mourning the hero's death, until the cynical drifter stands up, shaking off the dust. He reveals he shoved his scabbard into the leader's throat in that exact split second, just to cushion the fatal impact. Repeating the lethal short strike strategy, Kenshin dismantles Aoshi on the floor. The ninja's weird goons limp in just in time to see their boss sprawled out, begging for an honorable finish. But the redhead drops that same insufferable pacifist talk of someone who refuses free blood. That's when the wannabe mobster Kanryu bursts through the door carrying nothing less than a brutal Gatling gun that spits 200 rounds a minute, proving that no martial art is efficient against infinite lead. The suit wearer cranks the hole-making machine, wanting to become the Empire's biggest arms dealer in a fit of megalomania. What follows is a tragic festival of lead and purely stupid heroic sacrifice. The brute Shikijo becomes a human sieve to protect his unconscious boss. The fire-spitting fat guy tries to run in a straight line against a rain of bullets and goes down the drain with zero effort. The dwarf fires a tiny dart into the air before being relentlessly gunned down. And finally, the masked Hanya uses his own shredded back as a shield so Kenshin can reach his discarded sword. But the absurd collective suicide produces a perfect plot miracle. The dwarf's dart jams the heavy weapon's fine gears, locking everything up at the exact second Kenshin soars over the chaos. Without his hole-punching toy, Kanryu pisses himself and cries for mercy, but swallows the blunt blade right in his teeth, dragging his chin across the floor.
If you're begging for your life, why don't you ask your money to save you?
Upstairs, Megumi tries to cosplay as a corpse by stabbing her own gut to pay her debts to the afterlife, but Sano rips the steel from her hand with brute force and teaches her that atonement means working like a dog to save lives. The cartel sinks for good. Kaoru forgives the woman on the spot, and Kanryu goes to jail, while Aoshi becomes a bitter widower staring at the empty graves of his fallen friends, promising a bloody rematch in the future. Taking a break from the usual bloodshed, the brat Yahiko has his very first brush with puberty when a sweet girl named Tsubame mends the broken strap of his lone sandal. The kid turns bright red and freezes up, a shock so obvious that his older friends immediately sense the high school romance vibes pulsing through the restaurant where the girl has started working. The problem is, humble folk never catch a break. A street gang led by the arrogant scumbag Mikio corners the humiliated girl, demanding her boss's keys so they can bleed his safe dry under the cover of night. To ensure the trauma sticks, Mikio delivers a stinging slap to her face. Trying to play the revolutionary alpha male, Yahiko storms into the alley spitting a fervent monologue about class equality and social justice. For his trouble, he ends up eating dirt, taking a collective boot to the ribs from the grown men. He serves as little more than a punching bag while the criminals snatch a copy of the key and mock everyone on their way out. Furious, the kid refuses any fancy help, leading Kenshin to drop a pearl of lethal wartime wisdom. The master tells him to play the cowardly bait, running like a terrified sprinter to split the gang up through the narrow back streets, forcing the idiots into one-on-one mortal duels where they can't rely on numbers. In the sweltering heat of the midnight heist, Yahiko emerges from the shadows and swipes the master key right out of the leader's leader's claws, kicking his getaway into high gear through the deserted city. Swallowing the bait of pure rage, the thugs chase him through rat-infested alleys, but the plan turns into a nightmare when the goons draw real blades ready to carve him up. Nearly wetting his pants, Yahiko freezes, but Kenshin and Sano suddenly appear on the rooftops, radiating a thick, terrifying manslayer presence from the old days. The intimidation is so heavy the henchmen pathetically tuck tail and run, leaving only the useless boss trembling with rage against a boy. In a frantic dance between heavy wood and deadly steel, Yahiko is pushed to the brink. His hair is clipped by blade, and his practice sword snaps under the pressure, leaving him cornered against a brick wall. But hearing Tsubame's high-pitched voice crying out his name through tears, the kid summons the ultimate shonen persistence. He uses the jagged remains of his broken sword to shatter the villain's legs, and finishes him off by thrusting the splintered wood into his shoulder, reaping the golden fruits of crushing romantic glory.
Gotcha!
To cap off the absurdity of the victory, Kenshin and Sano lose their grip on the roof and slide down like clumsy fools, making a sound like buzzing cicadas and completely shattering the serious mood with a bit of knightly idiocy, marking the moment the raspy-voiced brat became a mini-man of respect. On a mundane shopping trip hauling an absurd amount of miso paste, our trio of deadbeats bumps into Senryo-yama, a glorified mountain of fat worshipped by the locals as a sumo master. The friendly atmosphere sours when Toramaru, a washed-up ex-wrestler, tries to stiff a restaurant and gets a humiliating beatdown from the big man's gang. But the guy has a soft heart. He takes the beating just to avoid crushing a snotty-nosed kid's plastic pinwheel. Attempting to play divine vigilante, Kaoru takes a slap to the face, which is the perfect cue for Yahiko to push Kenshin into the fray. With zero military respect, the redhead pummels the thugs using literal pots of miso as lethal blunt force weapons. After discovering the poor guy is being bullied by his former colleagues, they find the hopeless wrestler about to log off from life by jumping off a bridge. In a pathetic attempt at a heroic rescue, Kaoru trips and both plummet into the water, which barely reaches their shins, instantly killing the drama. Sano roars with laughter at the public embarrassment, but the real supernatural miracle happens at the dojo. Toramaru devours Kaoru's toxic cooking and actually licks his lips, proving his palate is biologically dead. Fired up by this gastronomic aberration, the dojo mistress decides to become the lad's sumo coach. When the boys dare to imagine Kaoru sweating in a traditional mawashi loincloth, they get their skulls caved in with well-deserved noogies. But the peace evaporates when Senryo-yama and his troop of cowardly hippos invade the training grounds, pushing a colossal stone statue down from the hilltop. The crushing plan fails miserably when Kenshin simply cleaves the boulder in half with his sword like a slice of cheese. Holding Sano back by his collar to prevent a massacre, the redhead leaves the brawling to Toramaru. In a burst of gut-powered courage, the former coward punches the oppressor's massive gut and delivers a brutal shove, sending the human balloon flying. The school's official Grand Master emerges from the shadows, confesses he only exiled the boy out of sweaty professional jealousy, and hires his student back on the spot. With Old Man Ginsai throwing out his back at the well like a porcelain statue, it's up to Megumi to carry the region's public health on her shoulders alone. While she's busy saving lives, Kaoru tries to help by wrapping bandages around a poor guy's face until he nearly suffocates from her total lack of motor skills. The mood turns bloody when Sano carries in a comrade hacked to pieces following a mafia raid by the Hishimanji gang. Exuding academic arrogance, Megumi demands firm hands to hold the man's mangled flesh still while she drives her silver tools home, closing every hole with surgical precision so brutal it even makes the tough guy Sano offer a heartfelt compliment. Battling millionaire parents who'd rather throw money out the window than ventilate their tubercular daughter's dark room, the doctor hits some hellish competition. A theatrical charlatan named Raiko, holding a bizarre staff dripping with thick candle wax, the fraud screams gibberish incantations, waves his stick over a bucket, and has his goons drink holy water to forge fake miracles in the square. Backed by the same faction that stabbed Sano's friend, they ignite a nasty smear campaign to destroy Megumi's reputation and monopolize the flock of believers. The pressure cooker explodes when the thugs kidnap the rich girl, promising to exorcise her illness with the fake priest's sleazy mysticism. Yahiko and Megumi storm the cult's headquarters, but end up cornered by cold steel. That's That's when Sano kicks the door down, breaking facial bones with sadistic glee to protect his lady of the night. But the peak of violent delirium materializes outside when the mob points a literal wooden cannon and fires a heavy artillery shell. Mocking the laws of physics, Kenshin slices the cannonball mid-air with the blunt edge of his sword, ending the freak show and humiliating the crooks. Safe from danger, the fake saint cries on the floor, begging for medical help. Megumi toys with him, offering a simple glass of water, before concluding the afternoon by noting that the only thing incurable in the dojo is the excess testosterone coming from Sano leaning against the wall, while a group of elite assassins called the Jinpu Squad gains notoriety by slaying suits and dicing corrupt politicians in the shadows.
Who the devil are you people?
You men are monsters that abuse your power to fulfill your own greedy desires.
A professor named Sasaki arrives, carrying a child and asking Megumi to examine them. Apparently, forgetting he's off the clock, Sano sucks up to his old comrade, who spends his meager coins teaching starving kids to read in depressing shacks. But that charitable piece turns to trash when, during a field shift, Sasaki is suddenly hunted and tested by a weird black-caped villain cosplayer. The megalomaniac invader lunges for the kill, but the elderly teacher blocks the terrifying impact using the literal wooden handle of a dirty pickaxe. The man brags, calling himself Toma, and leaves with threats of future fatal encounters. Kenshin is left troubled, smelling the stench of a pretentious sword style from miles away, the insufferable Shiden no Tachi, a technique that plagued lives during the Kyoto carnage. It becomes obvious that the charitable teacher is actually an old government killing machine, buried under eternal guilt and trying to use white chalk as penance, while the Jinpu Squad lunatics harass him to reclaim his retired blade. Tired of being rejected, the gang leader corners the pacifist teacher in a carriage under the dead of night, silently annihilating the target's bodyguards. He shoves a polished hilt toward the old man, begging on his knees for a bloody conclusion to their bourgeois hunt. In a millisecond of impending doom, Sano dives in grinning and mashes the gang's faces, sparing the old men from unnecessary trauma. Toma refuses to flee like a loser and decides to clash steel with Kenshin, pouring all his life force into one last, secret ninja manual strike to shatter his defense. The legendary destructive technique sweeps through the air with absurd speed.
Here it comes, the Shiden blade.
To make matters worse for everyone's ego, a distant police whistle blows through the trees, making the brave assassin swallow hard and flee trembling into the dark brush. Kenshin sheathes his sword, finally putting two and two together to identify the teacher as the same living ghost he tried to mince 10 years ago during his old Batosai routines. While Sanosuke plays private security for Sasaki, Kenshin prefers scrubbing laundry until Toma pops up out of nowhere and walks off. The redhead follows the masked man into the woods where they begin to cross blades. Toma finally recognizes the red-haired ex-assassin and launches into the usual cliché discourse, whining that he only wants to butcher people to fix a broken society, just like the Batosai of the past. But before he can launch his ultimate attack, the Jinpu Squad snitches arrive with news of a new target, putting the duel on ice. Back at the dojo, the gossip flies, and they discover the next marked man is the bigwig Yamagata, all because a suit named Hashizume wants to eliminate the competition and line his pockets in peace. In the dead of night, the assassin extras try to storm the dojo, only to get tenderized by Sano and Sasaki. Meanwhile, the real show is on the road, where Kenshin personally intercepts Yamagata's carriage to foil the corrupt Jinpu Squad's plans. Trying to talk sense into the masked leader is more useless than talking to a wall, so a brawl breaks out in the dark. Without breaking a sweat, Kenshin parries Toma's entire special attack. When the kid gears up for a desperate second strike, the redhead casually sidesteps and drives his blade into the villain's back, buckling his spine.
Die!
Impossible.
The police crash the party, arresting the sleazy politician who tries to play dumb, whining about being framed. To close out this soap opera drama, old man Sasaki wrenches the sword from the youth's hand and tells him to pay for his bitter sins. Suddenly, Sanosuke snatches the weapon and hurls the iron straight into the dark river, reminding them that retirees shouldn't be playing with dangerous toys anymore. In a demonic heat that melts the soul, the gang of deadbeats heads to the circus to cheer for a kid named Marimo as she gets shot out of a giant gunpowder cannon. Everything seems grand until a greasy, bloated loan shark squeezed into a bizarre bizarre suit named Sumidaya shows up to collect debts from the girl's father, demanding cash or forcing them back into his failing freak show. One of his goons tosses pipe ash into the stinking straw to start a brush fire, but Yahiko douses the flames quickly to play the rugged hero in front of the cannon girl. Later, trying to act like a mature leading man on a nightly stroll, the bamboo sword brat spots the cowardly fat man beating Marimo's father in an alley and lays some wood across the goons' faces to clear the competition. With the old man broken on Megumi's stretcher, the crew decides to stoop to performance charity to raise funds. The catch? The mobsters stole the girl's gunpowder and soaked the rest just out of spite to bury the attraction for good. The result is Kenshin dancing like the clown he is on top of a giant ball, and Kaoru furiously throwing knives around Sanosuke's tied-up body, scaring the brawler so much he nearly jumps out of his skin. The audience begins to boil with rage hearing the old songs in the redhead's thin voice, but soon the original troupe of cowards jumps on stage to cancel the show with lethal force. Without breaking character or breaking a sweat, Kenshin massages the clown militia's ribs, ruthlessly rubbing the long, hard handle of his clown umbrella against them all. When the house literally almost comes down, Sanosuke saves everyone by propping up a ridiculously heavy wooden beam on his back. Seeing his puppets on the ground, the loan shark flees, trembling, trying to vanish into the dusty street, only to be violently swallowed and suffocated by Marimo's high-velocity buttocks as she lands right on his fat face, flying straight out of the cannon. With his ego dangerously inflated after chasing off a petty thief with a butter knife, Yahiko thinks he's a retired master and starts snubbing his training to become a bitter floor scrubber. What he didn't expect mid-cleanup was the return of the trash-tier Gohei, that humiliated villain from week 1, who has now struck it rich and still feels a weird revenge boner for Kenshin. He hires 2 strange assassin brothers and takes advantage of the empty dojo to mock Yahiko's missing testosterone, rubbing insults in his face until the kid snaps over not having a real iron blade in his thin hands. Blinded by fury and prideful stupidity, Yahiko sneaks in and grips Kenshin's large blade tight before running straight into the villain's obvious ambush on the nearest hill. As every janitor in the universe suffers in silence, the red-haired protector crawls totally unarmed to the meeting spot only to find the 2 ninja freaks wrapping his body in sticky, invisible web cables. The ultimate secret technique. Smelling blood in the air, Yahiko breaks through the spooky scene, pursued by police, until he runs headlong into the violent chest of the vengeful adult Gohei, who is perfectly framed with a killing blade in his claws. Trying to defend himself from the giant animal threatening to mince him, the wannabe swordsman uses tactical desperation learned in the trenches, seasoning the fury of Kaoru's style by dropping low to strike the wealthy snob's sensitive full testicles in a crushing volcanic blow, smashing Gohei's balls live on air with a merciless knee. The brat buys golden time, immediately tossing his sweaty metal member to Kenshin. The trapped hero snaps the traps off his chest and strikes the enemy's eyeballs in a swift, brutal crack, cutting the blind ties. Sweeping the filthy dirt floor in an absurd manner, the redhead releases an infernal flash of light, sending the remaining poor soul to eat sand in the catacombs. With a total of 0 functional brain cells left in his ridiculous pride, the forgiven brat immediately demands to patent the shameful act, arrogantly naming the lethal nutcracker as the very first original technique of the school. Our gang of unemployed heroes decides to take a vacation in Izu at Gensai's sister's place, but they soon discover the estate belongs to Yutaro, a spoiled and insufferable brat backed by servants who treats everyone like garbage. Thinking he's the master of the world because of his money, the kid looks at Kenshin, calls him a malnourished chicken, and demands a swordsmanship demo before he'll accept the redhead as his private tutor. Obviously, Kenshin has 0 interest in being a rich kid's nanny, and Yahiko finally loses what little patience he has, tackling the bourgeois brat to the ground with the fury of a vengeful proletarian. After a boring moral lecture from Kaoru about humility, the kid kicks them all out of his mansion, but karma doesn't wait, and shortly after, Yutaro is attacked by thugs on the road, only to be saved by an exotic nutcase named Rajuta who slices the bandits like deli ham. Fascinated by the free bloodbath, the boy adopts the assassin as his new idol and brings the bizarre troupe of Shinko Yahiko-style lieutenants to live in luxury at his house. The charlatan smashes the boy's wooden sword and hands him a real katana, puffing the blade up in his face. While our team of freeloaders enjoys the hot springs, soaking their meat in the hot steam, they discover that Raijuta has effectively hijacked the boy's mansion and is liquidating the family's assets to buy a heavy arsenal for war. That same night, the scammer leader tries to seduce Kenshin with a long-winded talk about the future of swords to recruit the legendary manslayer. Facing a humiliating rejection from our protagonist, the lackeys lose their heads and launch a bloody attack, slipping into humiliation until little Yutaro clumsily falls, about to drown in the violent ocean. Kenshin goes full John Wick mode, gives a taste of his Batosai side, and rescues Yutaro from the thug's clutches, diving into the river after the boy. The villain Raijuta and his gang think Kenshin is toast. But the next morning, the hero shows up at the clinic carrying the kid without a single scratch. Megumi immediately takes over first aid. While the rest of the gang chows down on sweets, Yutaro wakes up full of attitude, wanting to bail. Yahiko enters VIP bouncer mode and challenges the kid. If he wins a fight, he's free to go. Yutaro accepts confidently but takes a colossal beating and can't land a single hit. After the public humiliation, Kaoru activates Mr. Miyagi mode and starts training Yutaro in the art of the sword. The boy trains day and night and even thanks Kenshin for saving his life. The problem is, the kid has developed some serious Stockholm syndrome and is determined to go back to Raijuta's dojo to show off his skills, since he'd originally been invited to the gang. On the way, Yutaro accidentally bumps into Muraki, the Tokyo chief of police. The conversation becomes a reality check. The government has ordered the army to storm the villain's mansion, and the lead is about to fly. The boy sprints home in a panic and walks right into a scene out of The Purge, with mercenaries killing each other for sport. Now it's up to Team Kenshin to race there and make sure the kid doesn't become a statistic in the middle of this bloodbath. The war at the mansion is in full swing, pure Call of Duty lobby vibes. Kenshin enters the chaos, barks a command, and uses his legendary reputation to bring order to the house. Meanwhile, in the forest, Yutaro finds one of the henchmen bleeding out. Before dying, the guy confesses the whole kidnapping was just theater staged by Raijuta to gain the kid's trust. The villain himself appears and silences the henchman forever. When Kenshin's group arrives, the villain completely ignores the boy's bad trip and unleashes an insane move called Izuna, which practically rips the earth apart. Everyone jumps back. Yutaro, in an act of blind courage, steps in front of Raijuta, begging him to stop attacking those who saved him. But Raijuta has zero empathy, total Darth Vader vibes, and launches the attack without mercy, shredding his own student's right arm. Kaoru and Sano rush the boy to the doctors while Kenshin stays to settle the score. Patience has run out. Kenshin lands a two-hit Mortal Kombat-style aerial combo and knocks the villain out instantly. One of the cult members tries to take his own life over the defeat, but Kenshin blocks the blade and drops a moral sermon about paying for sins by living. At the hospital, the news is grim. The nerves in Yutaro's arm are destroyed, ending his career with his right hand. The boy leaves a letter saying he's moving to Germany with his uncle to forget Japan. At the docks, the mood is like a funeral, until Yahiko starts a fight, attacking the boy sucker punch style with a wooden sword. It seems crazy, but it pulls Yutaro out of his funk. He fights back with his crutch, using his left hand, and promises never to give up kendo. In the end, Yutaro's name takes a place of honor on the wall of Kaoru's dojo. Late and desperate, the gang of deadbeats sprints to catch the steam train to Yokohama, with Sanosuke breaking into a cold sweat and trembling at the sight of the giant, roaring iron beast. Sano tries to flee like a coward, but Kaoru forces the freeloader to plant his butt in the seat since she paid for the tickets for this pointless excursion. Bored with the drama, Yahiko goes to snoop in the engine room and finds the real conductor tied up like a honey-glazed ham. The fake conductor realizes the brat has blown his cover, draws a knife, and dangles the kid out of the moving train by his collar, barking orders for his team to stop the machine. Of course, Kenshin appears to spoil the villain's party, forcing the imposter to hurl Yahiko at the redhead like a bag of trash before fleeing to the roof. Thinking he's winning, the thug pushes Kenshin into the water below while armed henchmen prepare to rob a fancy foreigner's gold in the front carriage. With the carriages disconnected and ocean pirates swarming the stopped train, chaos reigns until Kenshin resurfaces out of thin air, mounted on a mysterious horse, and starts laying everyone out. The swordsman clears the trash from the tracks, shattering a heavy wooden barricade with a single flying strike, ensuring the locomotive's escape. Arriving in Yokohama, the foreigner weeps with gratitude, giving Kaoru a thick gold coin. She decides to blow the windfall on a group photo. Proving his bird brain hasn't evolved a bit, Sanosuke flips out again, whining that the devil camera will suck his soul out before being dragged kicking and screaming into the most humiliating pose of the day. 10 years ago, in a blood-soaked past, Tatewaki betrays the entire Sekihotai, rewarding the group with a complimentary firing squad, while young Sanosuke watches from the front row as his leader, Captain Sagara, is turned into human Swiss cheese. Cut to the present. A creepy old man stabs a blade into a portrait of Sagara, announcing that the executed gang is about to rise from the grave. Far from this filth, Sano agrees to become an errand boy to buy some art prints, squeezing hard-earned cash out of Kaoru, who is fed up with subsidizing this freeloading brute. While scouring the art stalls, the brawler spots a familiar face, tracks down the artist's address, and breaks into the home of his old friend Tsunan, who now goes by Katsuhiro. While drowning their sorrows in sake, Katsuhiro reveals he spent the last decade tinkering with explosive spheres, prepping delicious bombs to blow up the government and avenge their master. As the amateur terrorist brags about his balls, a gang of counterfeiters starts tossing explosives across the city, dragging the Sekihotai's name through the mud. Furious at the cheap plagiarism, Sanosuke thrashes a lowlife in a dark alley and discovers the hideout of the Yakuza, led by the scumbag Tatewaki himself. Sano and Katsu storm the place, crushing skulls and delivering punchy justice, fueled by rage. Tatewaki pulls a coward's move, drawing a gun and firing. Katsuhiro throws himself in front, taking a hot bullet to the shoulder. This triggers Sanosuke's primal fury. He buries a bone-shattering fist into the villain's gut, tossing his limp body onto a pile of broken henchmen. With police whistles screaming in the streets, the two vanish into the darkness, leaving the bloody cleanup to the idiots in uniform. In a suspicious fit of generosity, Sanosuke cons everyone by playing the rich man and throws a party at the dojo. Plymouth the adults with enough sake to melt their brains onto the floor. In the dead of night, the host slips away, proving the bash was just a dramatic farewell before he goes to play terrorist in the dark with Katsuhiro. The two sweaty rebels reach the Department of State reeking of vengeance. They plant glowing explosives as a distraction and scale the wall, thinking they're flawless, invisible ninjas. What the idiots didn't expect was to find Kenshin waiting for them like a disappointed father with his arms crossed. Sanosuke charges blindly, screaming his half-baked revolutionary justifications, but the redhead simply slams the boy into the dirt, testing the local gravity against his face. Katsuhiro wails that the government is the true villain, complaining about their dirty tactics, while Sano stubbornly stands up for more punishment. Tired of this useless, aggressive therapy, Kenshin draws his blade and strikes Sanosuke's midsection with a dull thud, instantly knocking the poor guy unconscious. The swordsman flashes the smile of an enlightened psychopath and walks away, leaving Katsuhiro looking like a confused clown as he hears his unconscious friend thank Kenshin for the divine beating. The next day, the rebellion sinks for good. Sano survives the blow and finds Katsuhiro burying his explosive toys deep in the earth, giving up on burning the world to become an anti-government tabloid journalist. Walking the streets as if nothing happened, Sanosuke receives a package from his old partner containing his final authentic masterpiece, a beautiful portrait of leader Sagara, a reminder of a humiliation finally overcome. Headlines are buzzing about the Kairyu pirates, but the real tragedy is unfolding at the Kamiya dojo. Our favorite leeches, Sanosuke and Yahiko, are whining on empty stomachs while Kenshin does the household laundry. Their aggressive boss, Kaoru, fries a single sad-looking fish, and the two starving brawlers start a cockfight over the side dish, knocking the meal onto the floor for a stray cat to have the best dinner of its life. When Kaoru discovers the mess, she humiliates the unemployed duo, reminding them who pays the bills, and launches a flying bucket that lands perfectly on our pacifist redhead's forehead. Fleeing domestic fury, the trio of nobodies encounters a bourgeois man named Yohei, handing out cash to anyone willing to be security for his ship. They completely ignore the warnings about pirates. Their stomachs are growling louder than their brains, but the sea demands its toll. Yahiko starts puking his guts out over the railing, joined by a mysterious figure emptying their stomach nearby. None other than Kaoru herself, who tagged along begging for a decent meal. Suddenly, the storm of the century breaks, serving as a red carpet for the Kairyu pirates to board the ship. While the brawl breaks out, Yohei ignores the carnage to check on his precious crates of silk, which smell suspiciously of illegal magic powder. Kenshin takes a hit to the shoulder and Yahiko is tossed into the ocean, forcing Sanosuke to take an unplanned dive to save the brat. Kenshin then crosses blades with the pirate leader, a woman named Shura. The redhead dominates her with ease, but the Coast Guard shows up, and a cowardly thug takes Kaoru hostage. Without a second thought, Kenshin begs to trade places with her, being dragged away like a tame dog while the sadistic crew sings hymns calling for his head on a platter. The pacifist wakes up tied like a salami and stripped of his precious blunt sword, arriving at the maritime criminals' private island. There, the bloodthirsty henchmen want to raid innocent villages, but Shura kills the fun, reminding them they only rob the corrupt. A hideous brute named Ginjo wants to see the redhead bleed, but Shura shuts him down, declaring the torture toy belongs to her alone. Trying to play tough, the captain releases Kenshin, returns his sword, and demands a rematch. Kenshin goes into ultimate simp mode, refusing to raise his blade against the woman who spared Kaoru and peacefully offering his neck, unable to strike the handsome wanderer. Shura has him tied up again at the top of a cliff under the watch of a kid named Sarujiro. Later, Ginjo confronts the boss on the dark beach, whining about her boring rules before trying to force a disgusting intimacy, claiming she's better suited for warming beds than leading men. As a romantic response, Shura rips the harasser's right eye out with her bare hands, securing a nasty scar and an imminent mutiny.
That snooty little bitch.
Seeking revenge, the Cyclops discovers that the merchant Yohei was trafficking heavy opium and heads to his lair to extort weapons, unaware that Kaoru, Sanosuke, and Yahiko have hitched a ride on his boat to rescue Kenshin. Back on the island, Shura decides to have a therapy session with her prisoner about his feelings for the dojo owner, but the tender moment is vaporized when the port explodes. The traitorous pirates surround their former boss with murder in their eyes. Kenshin breaks his ropes through pure plot convenience and starts handing out unarmed beatdowns until a cowardly sniper shoots Shura in the leg. To escape certain death, Kenshin grabs the wounded captain and dives off the precipice straight into the ocean's wet embrace, leaving the mutineers celebrating a false victory. Kenshin swims like a desperate fish to a damp cave and performs DIY surgery to dig the bullet out of Shura's mangled leg. With help from the young henchman Sarujiro, he finds a clean kimono so the lady won't die of hypothermia in her soaked rags. When the captain wakes up and sees the blood-stained knife nearby, the drama queen decides she failed the pirate HR test and tries to slit her own throat. The redhead catches her hand at the last millisecond, delivering a cheap motivational speech about hope that calms her emotional breakdown. Shura puts on the kimono, remembering her late father who asked her to wear it when she wanted to settle down with the love of her life, and immediately starts pining for the vagabond who saved her. Meanwhile, Sarujiro finds an elderly pirate high on opium who reveals Ginjo's dirty alliance with the trafficker. They drag the old junkie to a getaway boat where Kenshin is miraculously already waiting. In an act of pure heroic showboating, Shura cuts the bridge ropes, isolating Kenshin on the other side so she can go slaughter the traitor alone. The captain crashes Ginjo's private party, ready to crack skulls with a lone nunchaku. She mashes the brute, but the coward pulls a hidden blade and stabs her right in her already ruined leg. Just as they were about to toss her into the bonfire, Kenshin appears out of nowhere, handing out free concussions. In a total panic, one of the idiot pirates throws a disproportionate bomb, torching the entire forest in a brilliant display of negative IQ. Kenshin scoops Shura up, runs through the flames, bumps into Kaoru and the parasites who had just parachuted into the scene, and they all sail into the sunset. Shura promises to quit crime for her father's hippie dream. Keeping the kimono for the day, she reunites with the unemployed swordsman who melted her heart. The bloody past refuses to let go of our retired redhead, who wakes up in a cold sweat after another wartime flashback from his glory days as an unpaid psychopath. The next morning, Kenshin suffers from a severe lack of focus while washing the boy's underwear, sighing in corners like a depressed widow. Meanwhile, the rest of the gang of parasites goes to stuff their faces at a fancy restaurant to celebrate the birth of some random neighborhood baby. Sanosuke does what he does best, arrives late to beg for food at the empty dojo, only to run into a creepy pharmacist peddling dubious powder door to door. The brute rejects the drugs immediately, but his radar goes off when he notices the salesman's calloused hands look like someone who robs people at knife point in an alley. Dropping the pedantic disguise, the mystery man reveals his true identity as Hajime Saito. He draws his long blade and pierces Sanosuke's right shoulder with such force and speed that the vagabond flies backward, crashing through the wooden wall and collapsing spread-eagled on the floor like a hit-and-run victim. The stubborn ox insists on crawling back for a second round, only for the sadist to hurt him even more. When Kenshin finally returns from the street with his head in the clouds, the peaceful atmosphere of the residence dies instantly. The metallic scent of blood and the shattered wall reveal the brutalized body on the floor, making it crystal clear to the ex-assassin that this wasn't a common robbery, and that his arch-rival from the revolution is back, hungry for a free round of mutual carnage. In another filthy corner of the city, Saito holds a clandestine meeting with his suited master, Shibumi, the coward who funded that weird hat-wearing assassin in the past, assuring the government scum that the plan to cancel Kenshin's life is well underway and ready for slaughter. On a cloudy day perfect for a premature burial, Saito enjoys his morning soba in peace while agreeing to split the $1 million bounty with Akamatsu, an arrogant, generic henchman who practically begs to be humiliated in public. The plan to toss the dog a bone works perfectly, and Kenshin receives an anonymous romantic note summoning him to his doom in the woods. Arriving there, our swordsman hero easily dodges a flying kusarigama, dealing with Akamatsu's pathetic attacks. Kenshin evades the useless acrobatics, draws his sword, and uses the fool's own chain to gain momentum and counterattack. Returning untouched to the comfort of home, Kenshin is intercepted by a hysterical, overprotective Kaoru. She announces that the elite police have personally sent the dedicated officer Goro Fujita to protect their weak asses. As soon as the wanderer enters the main hall and locks eyes with the cynical suit leaning against the wall of his sanctuary, the air freezes. Within seconds, he reveals to the clueless group that this neighborhood watchman is none other than Hajime Saito, the sociopathic rival from his past. Thirsting for misery, the wolf in sheep's clothing takes the opportunity to verbally crush the redhead's disgusting pacifism, rubbing it in Kenshin's face that this cheap philosophy has turned the ruthless Batosai into a soft hypocrite who leaves his friends' backs wide open to predators. Ignoring Kaoru screaming in the background like a broken tea kettle, the funeral silence is shattered. Saito breaks all laws of aerodynamics and dives into a high-speed piercing strike, burying his blade into the protagonist's chest before the audience can even blink, proving that playing house has rusted his reflexes beautifully. Bleeding in puddles on the hardwood floor with a gaping hole in his chest, Kenshin tries to swallow the pain but is ruthlessly tossed around by his manic arch-enemy's destructive fetish. Realizing he's about to become a doormat for the police department if he doesn't act now, the redhead tosses the key to his fake morality into the gutter and lets the repulsively sociopathic murderer out of his cage once and for all. The hall quickly collapses into an unauthorized demolition zone, as these two war relics tear the structure apart, trying to skewer each other with animalistic speed. The useless audience suffers in silence on the sidelines, and Kaoru puts her lungs to work begging for the bloody show to end, dehydrating herself like a squeezed, giant onion. Just as Kenshin prepares to brutally amputate Saito's arrogant head against a fractured arm in a violent collision, the meddling Home Minister Okubo appears right on time, ruining the entertainment and ordering the thugs to sit down. To kill the night's stupid adrenaline for good, the bearded big shot explains the charade. The recent bloodthirsty outburst was just a sweaty HR test for the Kyoto brass to see if the ex-psychopath still had it, or if he'd gone senile. The suit then drops the real bombshell about Japan's monster in the closet. Kenshin's former successor in the shadows, Shishio, whom the military once burned raw in hopes of a live cremation, has clawed his way back from hell. Now looking like a pyromaniac mummy, he's formed a militia to slice up the nation's prophets and bodies alike.
He has become a demon of revenge, and makers of weapons who want to abolish peace. They are evil men, a large army of killers in the underground of Kyoto under his command.
Defying the bureaucrats' dictatorial expectations, the stressed-out dojo squad shrugs at the dying civilians, refusing to lick the boots of the Republic just to become suicide bait. Away from the weeping circle, Saito decides to play janitor at the enemy hideout. He detaches Akamatsu's sweaty head with half a subtle movement, and fixes his lethal gaze on the trembling Shibumi, brutally splitting every bone of the man's pride across the filthy floor. Disappointed by the dojo kid's disgusting rebellion, Okubo enters his carriage, offering a measly 7 days for them to decide between changing diapers or saving the country from a burning army, forcing the reality down their throats. May 14th is going to hit hard. The clock strikes May 14th, and the expiration date on the redhead's piece finally arrives. While Kenshin tries to clean the house like the perfect maid, the useless gang gathers to stop him from becoming a government pawn again. But our ex-assassin has more faith in suits than you have in your own future. He rushes to catch Minister Okubo's carriage. The problem? Shishio's corpse delivery service is absurdly efficient. Inside the carriage, Okubo receives a pleasant, deadly surprise from a meddling boy named Sojiro, right before a band of rogue samurai intercept the vehicle, thinking they've scored the big kill of the day. Kenshin arrives at the crime scene late, as usual, only to find the minister's sliced remains and a message from the psychopathic kid, guaranteeing he'll be turned into barbecue if he tries to challenge Shishio. The reality check hits Kenshin hard. He visits the police only to hear the depressing murmurs of Saito and his bosses about how Japan just lost its only decent bureaucrat and the nation is on the brink of collapse. Walking at sunset, the existential crisis hits Kenshin with full force. At night, while the supporting cast is conveniently out of the house for a delivery, Kaoru goes hunting for her favorite redhead in the streets. In the dark, he emerges skulking like a rat bearing bad news, dumping the entire government tragedy on her and announcing he must march to Kyoto. Kaoru pours her heart out, begging him to stay and gushing about how he changed everyone's life. Kenshin agrees, thanks her for the motivational sermon, gives her a tight hug just to get her hopes up, and hits the road without looking back, leaving the poor girl dehydrating as she sobs on the dark sidewalk. The Kamiya dojo becomes a graveyard of chronic depression, with Kaoru fused to her mattress like a withered vegetable. Far away, Sanosuke discovers he was left behind by his supposed new best friend, and has an enviable temper tantrum, smashing tables and kicking chairs before going to whine for money and scoring some bombs from his brother Sunan. The Roosterhead decides to march angrily to Kyoto, but he's blocked by the city's deadliest traffic guard. Saito emerges from the shadows just to rub it in Sanosuke's face that he's nothing but dead weight, who would die at the first corner. Hand in hand with his own ineptitude, Sanosuke thinks he can tank the cop and chooses violence, but Saito just wipes the floor with the poor guy's face, using humiliating techniques meant for disarming a throwing a fit toddler. Yahiko watches, traumatized, as Sanosuke takes an epic beating, smashing his knuckles against his rival's cement defense while still trying to stumble back up.
Why do I keep missing and he keeps hitting?
Saito simply rolls his eyes, warns him that terminal stupidity is a fast killer, and vanishes. Back in the dark, moldy room, Kaoru continues her corpse impression until Megumi storms in, kicking the door open with a bucket of cold reality. The lady's blood boils and they almost come to blows over a man, but the doctor rubs it in Kaoru's flabby face that Kenshin had the decency to say goodbye only to her. In a supreme act of charity, Megumi hands over her potent miracle ointment, demanding the jilted girl stop crying and go polish the redhead's sword in Kyoto. Finally growing half a spine, Yahiko drags the leader by the ear and decrees that the entire fan club is going to storm the enemy's lair on pure spite. Kenshin and Saito face off, spending several minutes measuring whose sword is bigger. Saito tries to force the swordsman to release his inner animal, provoking him until his nerves explode, but magically lowers his guard and hides his lethal toy in his pants, saving the pleasure of the carnage for another time. Kenshin decides to walk peacefully to Kyoto to avoid bloodshed and ends up getting kicked around like a stray dog by a grumpy guard. While the juvenile duo pays for a fancy boat ride, Sanosuke becomes an insane Minecraft lumberjack, punching tree bark while completely lost in the wilderness. At the abandoned dojo, Megumi runs into the vengeful goth, Aoshi, who is salivating at the thought of taking the redhead's head. Saito intercepts the visit, tossing his spy ID on the table to dump Shishio's dirty secrets directly into the unemployed emo's ear. Seconds later, in a dark cemetery, Aoshi catches 4 generic muscle mountains having a cursed picnic on his fallen friend's humble graves. The quartet scoffs at the leader's massive blade, thinking he'd fail miserably to draw the colossal smoke in time. The vengeful one quickly exposes his 2 hidden short swords and turns the enemy's arrogance into instant pate, unleashing a crushing technique. Sojiro appears, clapping for the sadistic masterpiece, and pokes exactly at Aoshi's abandonment issues to lure the maniac into the bloody clutches of Kyoto. While Megumi's dirty mind fails her, practically cremating her patients alive while fantasizing about Kenshin's touch, the protagonist settles down on a crooked branch to warm up some free fish. Spotting bandits ambushing a damsel in distress, Kenshin dives into the fray only to be shocked. The young girl is smashing the bandits herself and cleaning the poor guy's wallets. She calls the great Batosai a smelly hobo and threatens to take every cent he has. The bratty ninja Loli spends her entire arsenal trying to get her hands on the hobo's giant sword, but the protagonist is so slippery she only catches the wind. When the girl resorts to throwing daggers, Kenshin simply hijacks her cloak and uses it as an inflatable shield, tearing her clothes and sending the thief into a tantrum. Demanding payment for the wardrobe malfunction, she confiscates the reverse blade sword until he coughs up the cash, only to be hit with disappointment when she realizes the great manslayer's wallet is full of nothing but air and dust. After playing the hero by returning the dirty money to its rightful owner, the redhead returns to the road, gaining a talking barnacle as a bonus. Misao whines in his ear until karma knocks on the door in the form of a furious Yakuza gang blocking both ends of a bridge. Having no time for radioactive trash, Kenshin merely scribbles a circle in the wooden floor with his sword and dispatches the idiots straight for a forced bath in the shallow river. Impressed, the brat brags about her group of pet heroes, the famous Oni Waban group, causing the wanderer to accidentally let the name of the depressed goth, Aoshi, slip. The next morning, eager to avoid an involuntary adoption, the protagonist tries to delete the girl from his routine by leaping over a chasm the size of the national debt. Refusing to be left behind, Misao takes off without a parachute and quickly discovers that gravity doesn't care about her ego. As she plummets to become cliffside mash, Kenshin sighs, dives into the hole, grabs the girl, and bounces off a random rock with the flawless physics of a bald tire, returning to the surface unscathed. The ninja wakes up drooling. He tells her to go home and play safely, but stubborn stupidity wins out, and the annoying pursuit toward Kyoto continues. In a desperate attempt to escape teenage babbling, Kenshin drags the duo through a tick and snake-infested jungle, even refusing a free snack offered by the girl out of sheer poisoning paranoia. The wilderness trek is abruptly cut short when they stumble upon a dying man bleeding his guts out against a tree trunk. With his final breath, the extra dumps an irreparable trauma onto the redhead's shoulders, begging him to look after his little brother Eiji and save Shingetsu village from the sweaty clutches of Shishio's army. With the corpse buried, the newly awakened brat spits out vital exposition, revealing that the small town has turned into a dictatorial theme park. Leaving the kids behind in a bush, the wanderer decides to sneak into the ghost village, only to be greeted by the mutilated corpses of Eiji's parents hanging from a pole like macabre Halloween decorations. The boy snaps and screams, alerting a squad of nocturnal cosplayers led by a generic henchman. Having zero patience for authoritarian speeches, Kenshin turns the entire troop into punching bags, sending the army into a coma using nothing but the weight of his blunt steel. While the protagonist wipes the floor with those morons, one of the idiots tries to shank Misao from behind. The sadistic cop Saito literally spawns from the shadows, brutally finishing the man off. The smoker takes the moment to humiliate the warm corpse and call the teenager a high-strung weasel. The villagers, sunken in total spinelessness, forbid the removal of the bodies for fear of a villainous spanking, forcing Kenshin to slice the ropes himself while Saito drops acidic truths about the crowd's miserable cowardice. As the group organizes yet another woodland funeral, the charred mummy Shishio takes a nice soak in a superheated bathtub, threatening to burn his useless minions alive for their incompetence. Guided purely by a kamikaze instinct for premature revenge, the two kids run off to invade the enemy lair alone, while the duo of veteran assassins knocks on the evil mansion's front door, greeted by the psychopathic grin of the employee of the month, Sojiro. Sojiro plays 5-star hotel receptionist and amiably guides the duo of hired killers into the bathhouse mansion. Outside, the two miners fail miserably at stealth tactics because the elite ninja almost has a heart attack after locking eyes with a wild spider. Spotted by the brainless guards, Misao vents her stress by shattering everyone's jaws and recruits the only semi-conscious henchman as her personal GPS for the rescue. In the smoke-filled VIP room, Kenshin and Saito stand face to face with the human cigar, Shishio, who oozes necrotic snark alongside his high-end escort, Yumi. The redhead draws his bent tool, completely out of patience for the conquering Japan talk. But the mummy isn't in the mood to waste breath yet. He quickly summons the sweaty brute, Senkaku, the bald mountain of muscle responsible for turning the brat's parents into pole ornaments, who tears through the wooden floor in a dramatic entrance. The obese beast comes in hot, pulling 2 massive butcher knives and screaming that the short pacifist will be his memorable 100th victim. What unfolds on the tatami is a display of pure, corporate leg-tiring humiliation. The giant tries to mimic the Wanderer's absurd movement in a frenetic game of life or death tag, but his high-calorie diet works against him. In a pathetic twist, Senkaku shreds his own knee ligaments from chasing the wind and collapses to the floor, whimpering like a slaughtered pig. The monster tearfully begs for mercy, kissing the untouchable protagonist's feet, leaving Shishio in absolute visual disgust. The carbonized boss threatens to decapitate his own recyclable trash if the redhead doesn't drop at least one designer attack for the show. In an act of painful charity, Kenshin grabs his toy's hilt with both hands and takes off, delivering a blistering upward hook straight to the big guy's throat. With the temporary corpse sprawled on the floor, the redhead fixes a hateful glare and demands the bandaged success get his lazy ass off the tatami and start fighting. After seeing his personal brute collapse on the tatami, the charred mummy decides the cute protagonist isn't worth the sweat on his bandages. Shishio hugs his high-end escort and flees through a secret tunnel, tossing his own sword to the kid Sojiro while dropping the lame excuse that he'll only fight if the legendary manslayer shows his true lethal face. Alone in the room, the pacifist redhead and the psychopathic boy begin a fixed staring contest. The protagonist tries to read the brat's aura, but the boy has the emotional depth of a freshly painted door, maintaining that plastic smile that ignores every provocation in the universe. With no other creative options, Kenshin caresses the hilt of his tool. Sojiro mimics the movement just to mock him, and both draw and strike at the speed of light. But instead of a frenetic bloodbath, the underwhelming encounter ends in mutual frustration when the redhead's legendary blade flies off, completely shattered in the middle, leaving the kid's weapon cracked and useless for the rest of the semester. Sojiro smiles and runs off after his boss to find a new toy, leaving Kenshin to turn around and deal with Eiji's teenage rage. The brat raises his dead brother's weapon, wanting to mince the unconscious giant on the floor, but Saito cuts the homicidal spree short because he needs the punching bag alive. Stepping into a not-so-qualified social worker mode, the redhead drops a dramatic speech about how that old blade was made only to protect, convincing the emotionally unstable boy to drop the steel. With the village liberated, the cowardly locals who were previously shaking in their boots miraculously find the courage to yell at the henchman tied to the police cart, proving that community courage is a fraud. In a terrifying miracle of charity, Saito decides to ship the angry orphan off to live with his own wife, telling Kenshin to become a man before vanishing. Now disarmed and terrified, the wanderer returns to the dusty road with Misao, fervently praying he never has to wake the throat-ripping beast locked inside him. Walking along the seaside, the underage thief gives the weird protagonist an affectionate rear-naked choke, while he tragically reflects on the friends he left behind. Meanwhile, in the middle of nowhere and lost in the woods, Sanosuke's muscle brain suffers from rumbly tummy syndrome. Grabbing an old sweet bun to kill his afternoon hunger, he ends up losing his delicious food in the dirt because the entire forest suffers a bizarre earthquake from beyond. Swallowing the dust-coated food with pulsing hatred in his eyes, the ex-revolutionary scouts the area, only to discover the tremor came from a giant bald monk who loved shoving his huge, hard blade into holes in the ground with ritualistic flair, destroying stone statues with nothing but raw hand strength.
But what's this he's doing? Some kind of prayer or something?
The muscular man is approached by the cranky brawler who decides to forget the stress for a plate of boar and a full bottle of sake by the fire, proving that the big guy broke every possible sacred rule just to pour booze down his sweaty throat. When the fight addict realizes that it was actually raw, divine physical strength disguised without magical religion, Sanosuke snaps, begging the spiritually deceased monk to teach him his destructive physical secrets to save the world. The giant baldy drops the truth, named the Futai no Kiwami, a sadomasochist sadomasochistic trick that consists of hitting the same rock twice almost simultaneously to pulverize it from within without ceremony. Given the ultimatum to master geological crime in 1 week or die trying from exhaustion, Sanosuke rips the skin off his own hands, punching the hard ground day and night without interruption. Near death and losing his respiratory capacity, he pathetically hallucinates with the weeping ghost of his old dead master from the past, decides not to give up on the drama, draws energy from the dust, and punches the thick mineral, obliterating the universe in front of him into shimmering powder. As he goes on his way thinking he's the reincarnation of a demigod, a cruel surprise hits the lonely monk when his sadistic colleague Sojiro pops out of the grass, summoning him to Shishio's military camp of demented mutants in Kyoto. The charred mummy's macabre crew finally unloads their bags in Kyoto just hours before Kenshin and Misao also stumble into town. The hysterical girl runs straight to the restaurant facade she uses as a base, where a charismatic, smiling old man nicknamed Okina welcomes the new scruffy clients with open arms. As soon as the chatterbox turns her back to soak in a decent bath, the decrepit old-timer discreetly reveals his credentials as the scary chief of the Oniwaban group Ghost Spies, proving he knows the red-headed ex-assassin's entire criminal record. Without stalling, Kenshin mourns in secret over the shredded deaths of his ninja friends in Tokyo and immediately orders a search for the legendary blacksmith Shaku Arai to fill his own lack of an instrument. The next morning, the scarred-cheeked tourist, the screaming ninja, and the ghost spy invade the new residence of the genius forger's son, named Seiku. The young man now earns his bread, polishing humble vegetable knives and preaching puritanical peace. Upon brutally refusing to forge a piece of flying steel for the red-headed wanderer, Kenshin borrows a small knife, pulls a giant cylindrical daikon radish from behind his kimono fabric, and slices the thick vegetable, sliding the blade at blind speed until the halves stick back together on their own, forcing the audience in the room to lose their minds. Even so, the blade vegan kicks the group to the curb. Minutes after the peaceful diplomatic failure, a pathetically bleach-blonde guy named Cho breaks down the door, asking for the inherited deadly treasure. Acting like the typical incarnation of pure, villainous tactical jerkery, the home-invading swordsman triggers his sick maternal instinct and kidnaps the unharmed newborn from the poor house right in front of the annoying blacksmith, with the baby screaming under the care of greasy hands, hanging from the villain's absurd sword until they reach a hidden temple in the Divine Woods. The disaster is reported back to the inn by the wings of a chatty pigeon, to the blonde's absolute lethal horror. Before he can even set foot in the stolen sanctuary of the legendary sacred sword, Kenshin emerges from the shadows, his eyes beating down the criminal, removing the strips from his scarred cheek to show he came ready to slaughter the pathetic wretch in the name of the screaming baby. At the Hakusan shrine, the blade-hungry Cho uses the most cowardly tactic in the modern villain manual and hangs baby Iori from a tree like a Christmas ornament, forcing the pacifist redhead into a criminal duel. The bleach blonde draws his segmented sword, thinking he's going to dominate the situation, but Kenshin shatters the piece of junk with a simple shove and sends the moron flying with a blow that would send any normal human to the hospital. Unfortunately, the blonde cockroach is resilient. He pulls out the infamous Hakujin no Tachi, a bizarre blade that wiggles like a snake in heat and brings terror to the arena. While the redhead takes a beating from the villain's lethal rhythmic gymnastics ribbon, the weeping blacksmith Seiku decides the best idea is to throw in the towel and let his ally die for nothing. Misao and Okina give the coward a brutal reality check, reminding him that Kenshin is out there risking his own sacred hide for the snotty baby. With a miracle of divine enlightenment, Seiku finally takes his head out of the sand, runs into the middle of the glittering carnage, and tosses the final mysterious weapon forged by his father right into the wanderer's hands. But before unwrapping the metal toy, Kenshin freezes in panic, terrified of breaking his vow not to kill, and Cho decides it's the perfect time to test his blade on the newborn. Faced with this cowardly audacity, Kenshin flies like a possessed demon and unleashes a Ryukan Sensumuji that mashes the spiky-haired blonde's skull.
He ain't human!
To the general shock of the forest audience, the new sword is a brand new, authentic reverse blade sword. Reading the poem hidden at the bottom of the reinforced hilt, the redhead realizes the old blacksmith's pacifist hopes matched his own perfectly. Taking advantage of the fact that the baby survived, the swordsman sneaks off in the morning toward his on-steroids master. Little Misao snaps from the abandonment and runs wildly through the city after him, which conveniently makes her collide in the middle of a crowded street with Kaoru and Yahiko. When the hysterical hysterical ninja screams her beloved wanderer's name to the four winds, Kaoru finally realizes she's found the link to reconnect with her man. Far from urban civilization, Kenshin arrives by surprise at a pottery workshop in the middle of the woods and immediately tries to slice a white-caped bricklayer from behind, only for the husky fellow to dodge with the lightness of a feather and reveal himself as his egocentric ex-master, Hiko. Meanwhile, in the capital, the Kyoto troupe drags Kaoru and Yahiko to the ghost restaurant, earning Okina's irresponsible seal of approval to continue the hunt for the redhead. Taking advantage of the morning momentum, the mischievous old man goes to the market to bicker with the dark goth Aoshi, demanding his ex-pupil stop the nonsense and warning that he'll have to ship him straight to hell if he doesn't drop this ingrown splinter of revenge. The trench-coated assassin crosses his arms, cuts the chat, and enters a filthy alley to join Shishio's psychopaths, who promise to deliver the pacifist's head on a silver platter. Back at the giant's forest cabin, Kenshin weeps on the floor and grabs his master's robes, begging to drink in the forbidden and ultimate techniques of the Hiiten Mitsurugi style. The mountain of muscle simply spits on the request, arguing that his apprentice tarnished the art by choosing to swallow blood in rotten politics. Right in the middle of this moral humiliation, the gang of stalkers breaks down the humble wooden door, interrupting the psychological terror. Using the ridiculous excuse of sending the legendary ex-assassin to fetch water from a well, Hiko uses the meddler's sharp gossip to confirm that Kenshin has turned into a repentant, whining Boy Scout. This bizarre conversion miraculously softens the giant's heart of stone, and he decides to teach him the deadly stuff, just to cut Shishio's party short. In a lightning-fast farewell, Kenshin spills that he's mixing stress-induced rage with a sick sense of relief at seeing Kaoru again, before the trio of extras vanishes over the horizon. Mid-tourist trek, Yahiko realizes his brain damage, forgetting the tiny lethal detail of not warning the redhead that the butcher Aoshi is loose in the capital. When Kaoru mentions that the haughty ninja has joined the Carnage Club, poor Misao's mental gears fry instantly. Right at the exact moment the Dark Lord shakes the charred, disfigured hands of the mummy to seal the pact of doom. The script throws in our faces the dark moment when Aoshi abandoned the spy headquarters to become obsessed with the top of the food chain, leaving little Misao in an emotional void. In the troubled present, the teenager finally swallows the reality that her trench-coated warrior has become a blind psychopath who just wants to kill Kenshin at any cost to justify letting his old team be turned into Swiss cheese by a capitalist Gatling gun. Tucked away in the dark lair of evil, the ex-leader ignores the value of his deadly spies and seals a blind combat against the rats of his own house when a bizarre owl-clad squad tries to take over the Kyoto restaurant. To the total shame of organized crime, Okina plucks all the ninjas without breaking a sweat and sends a packaged human corpse to carry the invitation for the absolute 1v1 the following day, while the little ninja runs the marathon of her life across the city, screaming in the belief that she can stop other people's masculine stupidity. Generational brutality explodes without warning. Aoshi shows no respect for his elders. He trashes the veteran's heavy, short, iron tonfas and eviscerates the old man's flabby body using his six-blade spinning combo like a heartless meat grinder. Parallel to this show of geriatric aggression, Shishio shows his profane pastor side on Mount High, grabbing his flunky Hoji's head with his own scalding hands in a fiery baptism, converting the sycophant into a fanatical follower of his own earthly hell of muscle and violence. Misao stumbles into the arena at the exact moment to embrace the old man, full of holes and leaking fluid onto the shrine floor. Aoshi casts his empty predator gaze, tells the emotional slave to dry her tears because she'll never see his bitter face again, and sends an imaginary note to wait for the protagonist at the slaughterhouse. Without lowering her rebellious eyebrows and completely ignoring the dying old man's tearful letter asking to end the circus, Misao stands firm, declares bankruptcy on her sanity, and names herself the absolute dictator of the soulless Oniwaban group. Far away, the humiliation of the Hiiten Mitsurugi training continues neat, where Kenshin is brutally beaten to the ground, taking a bone-crushing kick from the giant Hiko, who makes it clear that the soft sentimentality of not predicting strikes will end up sending Kaoru straight to a morgue slab. The script throws us back to the traumatic past where a bunch of filthy extras massacres a caravan of slaves, leaving only 3 women clinging to a useless boy named Shinta. The ladies become Swiss cheese to save the kid's life until a white-caped brute emerges from the dark, slices the bandits without perspiring, and tells the child to stop crying before he goes off to get wasted. But when the arrogant bodybuilder returns in the morning, he finds the traumatized boy digging crosses not only for the ladies, but even for the bandits who tried to rip him apart. Impressed by the cheap labor, the swordsman adopts the boy, christening him Kenshin because Shinta is a loser's name, and pours sake on the graves as a tribute. Back in the present, the protagonist is taking the greatest pedagogical beating of his life, moaning on the wet ground while barely handling the pressure of his master's strikes. Hiko loses patience with his pupil's incel performance, tells him to act like a man, and reveals his secret technique of 9 simultaneous strikes, the Kuzu Ryu Sen, proving that any block is useless when he decides to go all in. Kenshin survives the aggressive advance, but receives the ultimatum: learn the ultimate technique or be shipped to hell. The next day, under the rain, the two face off in the mud of death. Hiko advances, exuding murderous intent, dragging his student to his psychological limit until Kenshin finally abandons his suicidal martyr complex and decides he wants to live. Feeling the will pulsing through him, the redhead draws his blade in the blink of an eye, tearing through the wind and surpassing light to slash his master's chest. Hiko falls hard in the puddle, smiling at the mission accomplished, while the protagonist sinks into a nervous breakdown, screaming like a broken siren, certain that he drove it too deep and sliced his own adoptive father. Desperate, Kenshin furiously rubs a supposed miracle medicine onto his unconscious master's broad chest. The reality is that the protagonist's inverted sword is too tame to slice the walking wardrobe. In an attempt at blunt affection, the master offers his iconic white cloak to his student, but Kenshin rejects the heritage, refusing the title of successor because the cape would ruin his humble redhead aesthetic. Far from the wet mountain, Sanosuke rots in a Kyoto dungeon, swinging his legs in Saito's face. He pulls out his new hard and explosive technique, wanting to play, but the cop completely ignores the needy guy and focuses on interrogating the blonde baby kidnapper Cho. Trying to keep up the bad bandit act, Cho blatantly lies about slaughtering 50 men, but wilts like old lettuce under insults before confessing that Shishio has a trained blind psychopath named Usui slicing up the guards. The prisoner finally spills everything and exposes his charred boss's plan to roast the entire capital as a revenge barbecue. While the gossip flows, the freak show fan club of the Juppongata na 10 Swords finally compacts at the villain's base. The smiling boy Sojiro spawns out of nowhere, handing Shishio a sweaty piece of paper, warning him that their floating toy is ready to sail. Cut back to the carriage terminal, where Kenshin steps out of the wooden Uber, exuding a heavy aura of someone who just finished a crash course in aggression. The impact of the spiritual testosterone is so absurd that Saito almost loses his swagger trying to process the mountain of power the pacifist redhead is now carrying on his back. Kenshin's brain enters a tactical short circuit at the police station, and he realizes the arson plan in Kyoto is just a pathetic distraction to trick the cops. Shishio's true fetish is mimicking tragic historical events, planning to sail straight to the port of Osaka to bomb the government from a ship and spread national terror through the waters. The redhead shifts into first gear to run off alone and solve everything, but he's met with a thunderous punch to the face from Sanosuke, who demands to join this bro trip so he isn't tossed into the trash bin of protagonism again. When the clock strikes 11 at night, the villain's low-tier henchmen try to strike a match in the sacred city, but run into 5,000 sweaty cops and the entire Oniwaban Group fan club, who read the gossip in Kenshin's letter and spoiled the pyrotechnic party before it started. Amidst the urban chaos and unbridled brawling, the sadistic blind man Usui prepares to obliterate little Misao without mercy, only to have his weapon brutally crushed at the exact right moment by the glorious entrance of the giant Anji, interrupting the bullying with divine aggression. While the city settles its own ego fires, our trio of justice seekers arrives breathless at the port of Osaka and lays eyes on the target ship. Sanosuke already pulls his spiky balls from his pocket, thirsty to burst the villain's wood with homemade explosives, picking a fight with Saito's acidic pragmatism. But the childish debate ends when the water swallows a brutal detonation. Shishio laughs at their illusions, tossing the broken camouflage boards away to reveal he isn't floating in some little canoe. Slicing through the waves comes the gigantic, dark, and hardened ironclad Rengoku, flaunting its its thick metal and rubbing it in the heroes' faces that the artillery of evil just got a massive update, Sanosuke decides to play surfer on the floating debris, pulls out a pathetic homemade firecracker, and torches Shishio's massive ironclad battleship with the ease of someone lighting a stove. The bandaged villain realizes his overpriced toy has sunk and retreats in a frustration lifeboat with his troop of freaks toward an isolated mountain sanctuary. While the police extras count 41 dead in the city, Misao is throwing a tantrum at the base because she was humiliated by the sadistic blind Usui and had to be saved by the miracle aggression of the buff monk, Anji. Old man Okina wakes from his coma ordering Aoshi's assassination, but Kenshin gives the old man a hard no, promising only to drag the emo leader back where he belongs. Knowing things are about to get ugly, the firecracker terrorist warns the team that they depart the next day to storm the villain's country estate. At night, Kaoru goes to the roof to deliver her suspicious little pills to Kenshin, but the brat Yahiko appears out of nowhere, telling her to stop stalling and just go procreate with the redhead already. Kaoru is shocked by the kid's reproductive audacity, but the mood shifts quickly. Kenshin dodges his parental responsibilities, orders the boy to guard the base to prevent an attack, and gathers the squad. With a warm heart after promising everyone will return to Tokyo alive, our former assassin joins his justice crew the next morning and marches straight for Shishio's throat. Inside the lair of evil, the brown-nosing bureaucrat Hoji suggests a masterstroke of cowardice, sending the elite swordsman to handle the pacifist redhead while dispatching the rest of the genetic mutants to slaughter everyone left at Aoya. Shishio has a tantrum over martial honor, so Hoji completes his transition into a full-blown corporate psychopath. The blind Usui twists Hoji's finger like it's bread dough, and the advisor responds by stabbing his own hand to prove he's a company man. Moved by this display of corporate self-mutilation, Shishio approves the double carnage plan. While Usui sips snake blood through a straw to get in the zone, Anji smashes a giant Buddha statue just to warm up his enraged biceps. The protagonist's crew arrives at the sanctuary and gets a VIP tour guided by Yumi, entering a dark room only to find the anabolic monk waiting to slice through their sins. Sanosuke and his former teacher begin debating theology and world salvation by punching the building's support beams until Anji proves he's mastered the art of the futai no kiwami using any limb. The monk lands a crushing combo on the bad boy's stomach, but Sano decides to ignore multiple organ failure through pure juvenile stubbornness. He snaps at the monk's divine hypocrisy, copies his rival's defensive technique out of pure improvised spite, and rams a lethal sequence straight into the monk's abdomen. Sano thinks he's closed the deal, but Anji stands up bleeding, clutching a wooden prayer tablet, ready to ignore the laws of physics and continue the beatdown. The script fires up the time machine to shove the buff monk's tragicomic past in our faces. Back when he was just a peaceful nanny looking after orphans in a village full of bigots. While he was taking a freezing meditation bath in the waterfall to purify his spirit, the townspeople torched the sacred temple and turned his kids into an accidental barbecue. Anji becomes completely possessed by rage, cries tears of blood, punches the Buddha statue's face, and crushes the village head's skull with his own glowing, fury-filled hands. Back to the face punching of the present, Sanosuke can't stand the bald guy's existential downward spiral, and the fight turns into a high-level bar brawl. The two trade hooks and crosses in a cocktail of pure testosterone until the monk unleashes a long-range shockwave. Sanosuke realizes that getting hit actually hurts, kicks his survival instinct into overdrive, and launches a triple punch counterattack.
It's the same thing! It's exactly the same! You're just like how I used to be!
Screaming at the top of his lungs that the dead children are weeping on the monk's blind back. The colossal clash of fists makes time stand still. The monk's cluttered brain finally fries, and he enters a group divine hallucination where the dead orphans wave from afar, signaling that all is forgiven in paradise. Completely softened by the power of ghost friendship, Anji loses his will to snap spines and accepts defeat, throwing in a bonus tip. The rest of the villains are already on their way to decimate the hero's base. Ignoring the impending tragedy of his own friends with total apathy, Kenshin simply kicks down the next door. In the absolute darkness of the room, the sadistic, blind Usui smiles from his leather chair, perfectly comfortable to begin his deadly interrogation. Sano and Kenshin abandon the chain-smoking cop to deal with the sadistic, blind Usui without any adult supervision. Usui tries to show off by breaking Saito's sword and bragging about his Shingon, the superpowered consolation prize he got after Shishio beat the sight out of him. Saito decides to engage in dense, psychological bullying. He reveals that Usui is just a smiling coward pretending he wants to assassinate his boss because he's too scared to admit he's useless trash in comparison. Hit deep in his egoistical soul, Usui snaps, blocks Saito's famous attack with his turtle shell cosplay shield, and thinks he's incredibly safe by sticking close to his opponent's body to prevent another Gatatsu. But the blind man underestimated the cop's absurd capacity for deep, lethal penetration. Out of nowhere, Saito shifts into Gatatsu Zero and drives his sword so deep into Usui's soft chest that the guy ends up pinned to the ceiling like a Halloween decoration in extremely poor taste.
No, what was it?
The big man dies whimpering, humiliated by his own weakness, while Saito licks his lips in pure sadism, not even blinking at the gratuitous pool of blood he just created. Meanwhile, at the extras base, the loud group of girls and the rebellious kids split their targets to fight the bizarre dregs of the villainous gang. The rest of the hired goons serve as nothing more than a human wall to keep anyone from escaping the massacre. Back at the main lair of darkness, Kenshin is walking calmly down the hall with his entourage and his hostage concubine, when suddenly the supreme leader of vengeful Emos, Aoshi, pops up at the next doorway, violently demanding his daily quota of attention. The Justice Redhead enters the hall to face Aoshi, who is still reciting his broken record speech about how he needs to crush skulls to be the strongest man in the universe and honor his dead subordinates. Playing the insufferable pacifist card, Kenshin flat out refuses to unsheath his sword against a corrupted friend. To keep his promise intact, he starts hurling wooden bookshelves and thick books at the guy like a librarian in a state of absolute fury. Simultaneously, in the corner of the room, the seductive Yumi rushes to a telegraph contraption to live-tweet the chaos, tapping away exclusively for Shishio, who is laughing his head off in the VIP room thinking about the delicious bloodbath ahead. Kenshin's flying furniture pacifism obviously fails, and Aoshi forces the protagonist to draw his damn longsword by threatening to slice his throat open with his lethal twin short blades. Without mercy, Aoshi lands a gladiator to your elbow and a direct kick to the redhead's pretty face. Screaming for a fight against the legendary bloodthirsty Batosai, not this friendly drifter who throws decor. While the protagonist takes a beating and kisses the floor in the mountain lair, the allied base down below turns into a complete circus. 4 ninjas frantically throw poison blades at a fat guy named Iwanbo, only to see the lead bounce comically off the monster's absurdly hard elastic skin before they take a slashing metal claw to the face. Back to the emotional drama, Kenshin can't take being tossed around anymore and shifts into Hiten Mitsurugi mode. He drops a merciless aerial combo that breaks Aoshi's inflexible defense and opens a satisfying little cut on the Dark Lord. But the real critical hit is the moral damage. Kenshin opens his mouth to psychologically destroy his opponent, rubbing it in his face that using the names of friends rotting in the ground as a lame excuse for a suicidal tantrum is a colossal dishonor. The persistent protagonist continues his unsolicited aggressive therapy session, warning the long-coated emo ninja that he's drowned in his own navel and completely lost the plot. Frustrated by being intellectually dismantled mid-brawl, Aoshi wails on Kenshin in an uncontrollable fit of pique. The redhead sucks it up, takes the hits while gathering momentum from the depths of his soul, and says to the man to sweep the madness from his mind, reminding him that a tearful Misao is rotting at home waiting for him to become human again. The moral shock miraculously clears the darkness and cures Aoshi's goth phase instantly. His previously manic eyes lose their murderous glint, but his stupid alpha male pride demands this bloody fight end on the edge of a blade. They both agree, lower their stances for the final millisecond of the trade, and cement their feet. 10 absolute minutes of silence pass in a staring contest where both sweat buckets without moving a single arm hair. The disturbing trance only breaks when Sanosuke, who has done nothing but watch, notices notices Yumi's frantic finger tapping away at the telegraph. He shouts across the hall, warning Kenshin to keep his legs closed and not use his juiciest ultimate move. Otherwise, the spy Shishio will record the entire tutorial of the technique instantly. The mini distraction makes Aoshi bite the bait and charge like a missile, but Kenshin's predatory instinct is triggered. He spins his entire body at light speed, ignores all copyright warnings, and rips through his target's chest with the ultimate Amakakaru Ryu no Hirameki.
Style, ultimate attack!
The ninja's ambitions collapse along with his body onto the slate floor. Sano throws the gossip toy down from the second floor, smashing it in half on impact, while Aoshi scowls and whispers apologies to the great beyond, hoping the ghosts forgive this tremendous existential embarrassment. Down in the burning suburbs of the war zone, bigger things are shaking. Iwanbo relaxes his gut, reflecting slashing attacks with his own spare tire of jiggling flesh. But true doom strikes the heroines when Misao and Kaoru waste oxygen violently arguing over who is the most exotic and hot flower in the bunch to the enemy figure Kamatari, only for the universe to vomit the ultimate revelation. The rival with the seductive scythe and flat chest is actually a crossdresser. Extremely offended by this low blow to their egos, the two females of the house decide to jump in together and chew the threat's neck, purposely leaving poor kid Yahiko alone to be hunted by Henya, a bizarre scrawny aerial acrobat with a suicide flight complex and a rain of heavy explosives. Back in the beef yard, young Yahiko is serving as a stationary target for Henya, who has decided to embody a bomber pigeon with a military drone complex. The scrawny flyer rubs it in the boy's face that fighting on the ground is for plebeians, dumping an entire arsenal of explosives on the poor kid's head. But the brat switches his brain to survival mode, uses the smoke cloud as an invisible trampoline, and leaps into the stratosphere, smashing the kamikaze pilot's face with a blatant plagiarism of Kenshin's aerial technique. The impact is so stupid it flips the circuit breaker for both morons at the same time. Meanwhile, Kaoru and Misao try a coordinated attack against Kamatari, the seductive majesty who spins a massive scythe like an industrial blender. The brilliant plan goes down the drain in 2 seconds when Misao swallows a chain-attached iron ball right in the kisser, taking a forced nap. Kaoru is left alone, watching the enemy spin the weapon at light speed into an impenetrable dome. In the dream world, Misao receives a spiritual call from the late Hanya, telling her that the goth Aoshi has finally come to his senses and is headed home. This mystical delirium injects so much energy into the girl's blood that she stands up with shattered ribs, grabs some fresh knives from old Okina, and stops giving a damn. The two females sync their watches. Misao throws kunai at the giant blade, and Kaoru brings down her wooden staff at the exact same millisecond, turning the enemy's pride and joy scythe into scrap metal.
They went for the scythe!
Kamatari tries one last desperate move, swinging the chain toward Kaoru, but she simply ducks and breaks her own wooden sword over the cross-dresser's kneecap, ending it once and for all. The cowardly fat man Iwanbo had already evaporated from the map, and the gang thinks they can finally breathe. But a bizarre eclipse covers the sun, and they look up to face Fuji, a colossal titan, and his pocket master Saizuchi, ready to turn the dojo into dust. The colossal monster Fuji begins demolishing the entire neighborhood with a sword the size of a utility pole, making everyone wet their pants in terror. In the middle of the collective despair, the brat Yahiko finds courage in the pit of his stomach and plants his feet in front of the giant, ready to become sidewalk pate. While screaming for Kenshin, the titan brings down the iron beam to squash the child. But when the dust settles, the lifeline goes by the name of Hiko, who blocked the massive impact with zero effort. The buff and arrogant master rubs it in everyone's face that he's only late because his red-headed pupil is geographically illiterate and gave him the wrong directions. Exuding testosterone and conceit, Hiko tells the human trash Saizuchi to shut up and starts flirting with Fuji's soul. He congratulates the mountain of muscle for wielding a weapon with such perfection and gets real with him, knowing the giant has spent his life treated like a freak of nature. Hiko finally recognizes him as a true warrior. These words melt the big guy's heart of stone. Crying rivers of joy, Fuji tosses his dwarf master into the trash, rips off his own armor, and raises his sword to the sky to accept the honor of the duel. The impact of Fuji's axe against the earth creates a hurricane that nearly sweeps the audience away. but Hiko doesn't even blink. The master flexes his biceps and swallows the giant hole with a Kuzu Ryu Sen, having the decency to use the blunt edge of his blade so as not to slice up his newest #1 fan. Far away, the suit and tie suck-up Hoji has a spoiled brat tantrum upon discovering the massacre failed miserably. Simultaneously, Kenshin, Sanosuke, and the gossip Yumi reach the final door before the big boss. Inside, the smiling psychopath Sojiro sharpens his claws for the rematch. Kenshin catches the spiritual Wi-Fi of Karu's voice from across the country, concludes everything is fine back there, and enters the room to prove who's the real king of the hill in the apocalypse. It's time to tenderize the smiling kids meet. Kenshin, Sanosuke, and the luxury runway Yumi face Sojiro in the anteroom of doom. Sano almost soils himself, remembering the boy snapped the protagonist's old sword with a flick of his fingers. But Kenshin quickly massages his own ego, reminding his friends that he now has the supreme blade and a script-blessed secret technique, making him perfectly shielded against failure. The two take their stances, ready for a samurai drag race. At the first clash of metal, Kenshin cracks Sojiro's sword, making Sanosuke set off celebratory fireworks way too early. But the poor man's joy is short-lived. The boy laughs in their faces, explaining he was only using a fraction of his absurd speed, and switches on the hidden thrusters in his soles. Mocking the laws of physics with his ground compression technique, Shikuchi, the boy dodges Kenshin's theoretically unavoidable blow like an angry mosquito and slices the redhead's back before he even knows what day it is. Despite wiping the floor with the hero, the boy prodigy starts mental glitching, completely furious because Kenshin is still breathing. His indoctrinated brain can't connect the dots on why the redhead insists on saving useless chess pieces instead of discarding the weak. When he shifts into the next lethal gear of his engine, his clarity breaks and his speed begins to stutter beautifully. Kenshin pulls out his psychology degree, enters Sojiro's fragile mind, and spits the truth right in his face, claiming the masked brat actually hates ripping out people's guts. The revelation blows the kid's fuses. Completely disgusted by the reality check, he enters deep denial mode, stalls the murderous brawl in the middle of the room, and simply reaches down to fix his straw sandal straps. Back at the base, Karu plays Mother Teresa, bandaging the destroyed carcass of Kamatari, who is crying like a damsel because he lost his imaginary job vacancy, to Sojiro. While Sano licks the wounds on Kenshin's back, the two play psychiatrist, certifying that the junior psycho just swallowed his feelings into the pit of his stomach. Ignoring the impatient Yumi's cascade of insults, Sojiro sinks into a bizarre nostalgia trip to organize his mental mess before he loses his head for good. We dive into the smiling brat's dark past, discovering he was born from his father's side project with a lady of the night. His lovely adoptive family treated him like a prepaid slave, beating the crap out of the kid while he tried to process the trauma. Since shedding tears only led to more free beatings, Sojiro activated psycho mode and started laughing at absolutely everything. One fine day, he bumps into the walking barbecue steak called Shishio, who was slicing through cops in the woods like paper. The incineration man almost cuts the kid in half but gets tragically confused, seeing the brat smiling at death herself.
Does dying really make you that happy?
Huh? Make me happy?
In exchange for keeping his head attached to his neck, the villain demands food and bandages, teaching him a 2-cent philosophy as a bonus. The strong survive, and the weak are food. When the family notices the missing bandages and goes to execute the little traitor, he pulls out the bonus dagger he got from the terrorist and turns his own relatives into mincemeat under a cinematic rainstorm. Charmed by the brutality, Shishio adopts the family killer on the spot. Back in the present ring, the red-headed hobo plays street psychologist, diagnosing the opponent's bizarre emotional facade. Boiling with hatred because Kenshin is playing the polished hero now but failed to protect him when he was a childhood punching bag, the boy's screws finally fall out and the true lethal round shifts into first gear. Kenshin insists on continuing his aggressive therapy session, shoving it in the prodigy's face that he's actually dying of regret for slicing up so many people. This naked truth melts the boy's last functional neurons. He snaps completely and decides to erase the redhead from existence by driving his blade home with his steamroller ultimate technique. The two shift into 5th gear for the final clash, but the protagonist wins on a scrapped detail because Sojiro's sword was already cracked from the first impact, leaving him wide open for the hero's sacred attack to crush the contest. When the kid wakes up having his wounds massaged by Yumi, he magically accepts Kenshin's gospel of redemption. But before clocking out and signing his resignation, Sojiro hands his pet dagger to the consort and spits out a golden weakness. The redhead's ultimate attack leaves his left leg completely vulnerable. While the burned mummy foams with rage over his employee of the month quitting, the sadistic cop Saito gossips with Aoshi in the shadows, revealing his cowardly plan to let Kenshin and Shishio kill each other with exhaustion so he can just steal the clean kill at the end. Yumi takes the wheel as the underworld tour guide and leads our duo of invaders to the executive suite of fire, warning them there's only one chance to leave alive, if Kenshin turns back. Our hero ignores the prophetic warning, the dramatic doors swing open, and Shishio appears planted in a colossal bonfire ready to cook the protagonist's meat. Yumi's death walk drops the duo of invaders into an arena lined with tubes spewing flames, since the villain is apparently also a petrodollar tycoon in his spare time. The professional sycophant Hoji is drooling at the edge of the stage, desperate to see his boss turn Kenshin into a sieve. Shishio does the honors of the house, mocking the hero's cheap morality, while Sanosuke barks back, reminding the bandage face that he's leading a team of absolute losers. After checking his fake wristwatch and receiving a good luck smooch from his loyal consort, the final boss slides into the center of the ring. Despite being nothing but scraps after 2 bloody fights, Kenshin incredibly trades steel on equal terms, but the victory fantasy gets beaten by reality when Shishio decides basic physics don't matter and makes his sword explode into incandescent flames, slicing the redhead into a well-done version.
Kenshin! Lord Shishio!
Kenshin studies the cheap trick and figures out the magic combustion comes from pure, human tallow, accumulated on the blade after Shishio butchered hundreds of unfortunates, making Sano nearly lose his breakfast. Flaunting his killing toy, which is literally the evil twin of the hero's blunt blade, Shishio prepares for the slaughter. The protagonist stupidly tries to apply a recycled aerial attack from the tutorial. The villain simply cushions the impact with his hands, tilts his head, and tears a chunk of flesh from the hero's neck with his teeth. Kenshin collapses, writhing on the ground in sheer agony and despair. Kenshin takes a well-deserved nap after having his neck chewed raw, only to wake up and trade philosophical barbs with the villain. Our hero delivers a sermon on peace and life, while the pyromaniac mummy explains his plan to overthrow the government to prevent the country from becoming a playground for foreigners. Tired of the unsolicited lecture, Shishio simply grabs the redhead by the throat, rubs his gunpowder-soaked glove against him, and triggers a colossal explosion right in his face, sending the vagabond protagonist straight to dreamland. Sanosuke nearly has an aneurysm watching his platonic crush out cold on the floor, but it's Saito who crashes the party, launching his Gatatsu directly at the final boss's calloused forehead. It would have been a perfect hit if the villain hadn't equipped an iron headband under his rags, proving that taking a bullet to the head in the past taught him a thing or two about proper safety gear. Even with legs shakier than jelly after getting thrashed by a blind psychopath, the cop insists on his cheesy "slay evil immediately" motto, only to be humiliated and wiped off the map in mere seconds. With only the brawler Sanosuke left, the idiot refuses a golden chance to run and throws a punch, only for the villain to crush his fingers like stale jelly beans.
Shut up, will you?
In an act of absolute desperation, Sano buries his ultimate technique right into Shishio's cheek, shattering his own bones in the impressive process of dealing a total of 0 damage. The leader of the bandages reciprocates with a crushing blow that sends the brute tumbling lifelessly alongside Kenshin and Saito. As Shishio and his lapdog Hoji throw a premature victory party, a new challenger emerges from the shadows to ruin everything. Aoshi decides to show up with his new motivational personality, suddenly becoming the last hope for a team that currently looks like hospital waste scattered across the floor. Emo Aoshi takes the front line, burning through his entire arsenal in the blink of an eye, leaving the mistress-in-waiting and the professional bootlicker Hoji perplexed as to why he's sweating so much for nothing. But Shishio isn't stupid. He soon realizes the ninja leader was just stalling for time until the useless protagonist could recharge his batteries. Incredibly, Kenshin peels himself off the floor, the force of the plot armor making leaves fly, which miraculously wakes Saito and Sanosuke from their collective nap. The walking mummy loves the challenge, but there's a small deadly technical detail. His 15-minute combat limit has long since expired. Since his body can't produce sweat, he'll literally cook from the inside out if he keeps playing with his sharpened blades. Hoji is so marveled by his boss's blind confidence that he pulls a rifle from his coat and tosses it in the trash, because in this madman's mind, using firearms makes no sense when you can die charred like a rotisserie chicken. Shishio tries to grab Kenshin's throat to detonate the gunpowder a second time, but the redhead dodges flawlessly, causing the villain to blow up his own face. Seizing the comedic opening, our hero unleashes a 5-hit combo that would make any arcade player weep with envy, but Shishio absorbs every hit like a masochistic sponge. Ignoring the pain, Kenshin grabs the man by his bandages, refusing to let his prey flee before slamming the hilt of his sword into his forehead with the Kuzu Ryu Sen, sending the mummy flying into a wall. But just when it seemed they could finally go home, the flames of the arena begin to roar in response to the villain's malevolent spirit. Shishio pulls his final secret fire technique out of his hat, forcing Kenshin to silently pray that his ultimate skill is enough to counter this literal electric grill. The final showdown reaches an absurd climax as Kenshin activates his ultimate Amakakaru Ryu no Hirameki in hopes of putting the mummy to bed once and for all. But Shishio has clearly read the cheat manual and blocks the technique with the greatest of ease, giving the mere mortals in the audience a full-blown anxiety attack. When the villain raises his flaming blade, believing he's about to carve the redhead for dinner, physics decides to take a vacation. As Kenshin's brutally narcissistic master explains from the other side of town, the hero's technique has a catch that nobody read in the terms of service. The first strike creates a demonic vacuum in the air, sucking the target against their will into the epicenter of the damage. Spinning his body like a possessed top, Kenshin follows up with a second, terrifyingly stronger impact that shatters the villain's ribs and launches the zealot through the air. Unfortunately, the bandage-faced guy stands back up, despite feeling his own flesh melting in agony. That's when Yumi throws herself between them, begging them to stop the brawl. But true love in this anime is so touching that Shishio simply thrusts his sword through his own woman's chest just to pierce Kenshin on the other side, while the consort dies sighing with joy at having received her master's long blade in her final moment. Kenshin is left nauseated by the sick, total package sadism. Attempting to slice the stubborn protagonist who refuses to stop breathing, Shishio's body finally hits its expiration date. His internal temperature blows past any safety margin, and the villain goes into spontaneous combustion before everyone's eyes, burning until nothing remains but dust and fried bones ordered straight to hell. While Saito uses his unwavering logic to claim Kenshin only won because he survived the barbecue, the sycophant Hoji has a psychotic break. Refusing to accept his glorious master has checked out, the lunatic flees the arena toward the hidden basement armed with an axe, smashing every pipe in the place to blow up the entire building and eliminate any chance of a living winner. The escape bridge is turning into a giant human grill, and while the good guys try not to become kebabs, Saito lights a cigarette with the hellscape surrounding him because his blackened lungs have already given up on life. He warns them that Aoshi has the route map and simply vanishes into the flames like a D-list magician, leaving Sanosuke screaming at nothing. Outside, the villain's base collapses. Sojiro grabs his backpack of existential crises and wanders off to find himself, while the giant Anji decides to play the Good Samaritan and turns himself in, taking the fanatical Hoji along on a leash. A month passes in the blink of an eye, and while Kenshin enjoys a fatigue-induced coma, the Dr. Megumi rushes over to patch up what's left of his useless carcass. The whole gang is holed up in a restaurant sucking up to one another until the assassin-turned-stylist Cho appears, munching on someone else's food just to gossip about the fate of Shishio's band of misfits. Curiously, the government decided to pardon terrorists in exchange for institutionalized slave labor. Cho became a private detective. The giant and the old man landed 9-to-5 jobs, and the passive-aggressive Kamatari was tricked by Cho into working as an international cross-dressing spy tasked with seducing foreign politicians. Anji got 25 years of vacation in a frozen prison in Hokkaido, but Hoji had a monumental meltdown. He didn't get the stage he wanted at the trial and hanged himself in his cell out of sheer romantic frustration for his dead master. Speaking of the psychopath, Hoji wakes up straight in the underworld and runs into Shishio and Yumi, who are already organizing a corporate agenda to beat the hell out of the devil and take over the entire pit.
Where do you think? To take over this cozy place called Hell, naturally.
Shishio!
I'm sure Usui has got to be around here somewhere too, so perhaps...
Kenshin delivers his usual closing lines, tossing pretty words at the villains' graves and proving his heart is as soft as the gelatinous brain of Iwanbo, who only survived prison because he was too stupid to be considered a threat. With bags packed to return to Tokyo, Kaoru tries to play tour guide, but Sanosuke and Yahiko prefer an odd romantic excursion to the charred ruins of Shishio's arena. Standing amidst the pile of ash, the headband-wearing hooligan realizes that punching Saito isn't enough for his fragile ego anymore, declaring to the winds that he will train until his brain melts to surpass the smoking cop in absolutely everything. Yahiko, being the faithful sidekick he is, agrees to adopt the same megalomaniacal philosophy. Meanwhile, under a random bridge, Megumi drops 10 tons of reality on Kaoru, revealing that the protagonist's body is more wrecked than a budget car after rolling 12 times. If Kenshin keeps pushing his old chassis with these suicidal techniques on the battlefield, he's going to kick the bucket for good. The morally questionable doctor makes it clear that the dojo girl is the only emotional leash capable of restraining the redhead's impulses and keeping him breathing, dumping the heavy responsibility for his survival squarely on her shoulders. On the other side of the rainy city, Kenshin gathers the courage for the first time in 10 years to visit the grave of his late wife in a state of deep depression. His muscle-bound master sprouts from the ground holding an umbrella, throws it in his face telling him never to whimper for help again, and disappears into the mist. After gathering the whole crew under a painfully happy rainbow, they say goodbye to the restaurant gang and board the train. The script even gives us the fan service of confirming that Saito survived the roast and adopted Cho as his personal lapdog, just waiting for the right time to collect his blood debt. As they finally step onto the old road to Tokyo, at the exact spot where the drama of their separation occurred months ago, Kaoru reaches out her hand in a moment of nauseating sweetness, and Kenshin takes it, confirming the stray dog has finally left the streets. Back to mediocre life in the capital, peace reigns with the gang monopolizing all manual and domestic labor. Kaoru enters supreme bourgeois dictator mode, forcing Sanosuke to fix the exact hole in the wall he used as a drywall door thanks to Saito's punch, and making Yahiko scrub the wooden floors 100 times until his hands bleed.
We'll go over the house with wet rags 100 times today. What, 100 times?
As a complimentary punishment, the once legendary manslayer is demoted to weekend fisherman by the housewife, with the freeloaders demanding he catch an obese whale to fill their bellies for dinner. Tossing his rod into the river with the motor skills of a raw potato, Kenshin fails miserably. Not far from his shame, two neighborhood brats notice an elderly fisherman humiliating 4 street thugs who were trying to rob a rich daddy's boy. The mysterious old man doesn't even bother drawing a weapon, slicing through wooden planks and disarming the idiots with just a stare, sending them running in terror. Sensing the sword-crossing protagonist's lack of aquatic talent, the kindly old man drags Kenshin to a decent fishing hole and decides to vomit up his long and unsolicited depressing biography. The old man tells the saga of a random idiot named Ryunosuke who became obsessed with learning a gut-ripping attack from a masked bandit, leaving his village behind along with Kinu, a girl who spent the whole year praying to fireflies, begging for the heartless jerk to notice she wanted him. After wasting 21 wonderful years wandering the world killing random criminals out of sheer boredom, the bastard finally found the bandit of the storm, cut the extra in half with ease, and discovered the great art of ultimate death never existed. Returning gloriously with his useless face, Ryunosuke found out from a gossiping neighbor that the jilted girl had been photosynthesizing underground for a long time after waiting so long. The old man ends his morbid lecture by stating that a real man never runs from his ideal woman and vanishes into the horizon. Kenshin returns to the dojo empty-handed without a single damn fish in his bag, proving his complete functional stupidity, but escapes execution by leaving a seductive flower on the porch for Kaoru, while the rest of the gang eats the dinner the chubby doctor charitably sponsored. Returning from a D-list theater performance, our won't admit they're a couple duo stumbles upon the greatest plot convenience in the universe when a luxury carriage flips over in the middle of the sidewalk while being chased by street thugs. Kenshin scares off the amateur bums, and Kaoru rescues the precious cargo from the carriage, a foreign prince named Shin, who by some bizarre genetic anomaly has the exact same wild rat face as Yahiko. An ironed-out butler named Marcus explains that the traveling royalty is in Japan for a boring diplomatic spree with Yamagata, but they're terrified of local assassins. So, in a flash of highly questionable tactical genius, Kaoru suggests swapping the majesty for the juvenile delinquent, using the dojo as a cheap hideout for the real prince to play hide-and-seek, while Yahiko serves as human bait.
My word, he's identical in every way.
These sure are strange clothes.
From there, the true horror show begins. The whole gang tries to pretend they have high society manners, with Yahiko failing miserably at not acting like a street urchin, while Kenshin and Sanosuke deliver the worst performances as subservient butlers in the country's history. While the blue-blooded kid scratches his back at the dojo crossing bamboo sticks, the fake lord is sweating bullets at the diplomatic banquet. In the middle of the gala, a suspicious staff member thinks he's found the perfect isolated target in the royal gardens, only to discover the hard way that the supposed monarch's personal security detail was silently waiting to tenderize everyone's faces. The police magically sprout from the ground to collect the knocked-out trash on the lawn. The diplomatic crisis is instantly cancelled, and the rich folks head back to their continent, leaving a hollow threat that they'll return to annoy everyone again once the brat grows up. In a dark, damp alley, a random politician is cornered against a wall by mediocre thugs demanding a mysterious key. Panicking and using his one functional neuron, the suit tosses the tiny piece of metal through the air. But through the divine intervention of slapstick comedy, a ridiculous giant dog swallows the key and jumps into a sewer river to escape. The next morning, Sanosuke crosses paths with the drooling furball at a Shinto shrine, and the giant mutt immediately decides the hungry brute is its new inseparable soulmate. Despite trying to kick the clingy beast to the curb, the brawler ends up being dragged to the dojo with the damn pet, naming the parasite Notaro, just so the neighborhood kids have something to exhaust their energy on. What follows is an apocalypse of destructive cuteness, with the four-legged animal tormenting absolutely everyone present.
Gotta admit, he begs pretty well.
You stupid dog!
The unholy beast steals Megumi's sweets right off Sanosuke's plate, buries Kaoru's private property in smelly holes in the backyard, and monopolizes the residents' breathing space. Tired of supporting the kibble-consuming plague, Sanosuke drags the beast by the leash through the streets, hunting for the idiot who adopted the flea bag, and obviously bumps right into the thugs from the previous night. The dumb criminals recognize the dog and try to take it by force. Their arrogant leader dares to pull dual-wielded blades on the invincible blockhead, receiving a beating of epic proportions that would traumatize any chicken thief before they could even finish their catchphrase. Sanosuke mops the floor with the idiots' faces, the police recycle the unconscious bodies, and the politician collects his useless, slobbery key. The dojo crew says goodbye to the parasite with a monumental sigh of relief, although the smelly animal remained hopelessly in love with its temporary owner's violence. Drooling hysterically at a jewelry store window, Kaoru lets her deluded subconscious build real hope that the redhead pacifist would slip a sapphire ring on her finger during the Tanabata festival. But when the absurdly romantic date finally knocks on the door, the only thing the vagabond protagonist decides to do is hook a worm and go fishing in the woods. While the spinster seethes with contained rage at the dojo, she suffers an acute case of fake politeness when Yahiko acts like a refined gentleman offering help, and Sanosuke tries to shove a soft, moist cake down her throat. The suspicious charity melts away instantly when they reveal they were only trying to soften the blow for shattering her favorite vase and were begging for loose change to pay their liquor tab, earning them well-deserved punches to the skull. Kenshin emerges from the brush, smelling like stagnant water and bringing a hideous catfish home for dinner. Sitting at the table with the gossiping waitress Tai meddling from the sidelines, the freeloading manslayer nearly fractures his jaw chewing the soggy beast's belly, only to brutally spit out none other than the coveted sapphire ring. Pressured mercilessly by the loud-mouthed spectator, Kenshin hands the spat-out gemstone to Kaoru, who practically suffers a lust infarction thinking she's finally escaped the mud of celibacy.
This ring is for you.
Can it be? Can it really be?
The bourgeois joy lasts literally until sunrise, because Sanosuke catches a depressed cuckold trying to drown his sorrows by forced swimming in the river. The suicidal loser confesses through tears that he had a jealous fit and hurled his ex-fiance's ring into the muddy waters. When the street brawler reports the gossip to the boys at the dojo, Kenshin suffers a silent nervous breakdown, realizing he had accidentally activated engagement protocol. Immediately, the male duo tries to strip the millionaire band off the deluded woman in every cowardly way possible. They fail miserably to pull the ring off during intense physical training, set up creepy stalking tactics during her bath, and try to addle her brain by pouring cheap beer down her throat to see if her resistance drops. Sanosuke lets his tongue slip and snitches the rescue plan to the pseudo-bride, forcing the redhead to spit out the whole shameful truth. The fatal error occurs when Kenshin tries to explain that the object refuses to come off simply because Karu's pudgy fingers have swollen too much from holding hard wooden sticks at the dojo all day. The sincere compliment unlocks a fist of blind fury that launches Kenshin's face into orbit, generating the exact kinetic impact needed to eject the metal ring. She survives on buckets of takeout while the redhead slashes his budget to hand her a cheap bunch of flowers as a consolation prize. The gang of unemployed dojo dwellers anxiously awaits a fish fry, but the feast is ruined by an alarming letter from Misao. The ninja reports that rich folks are being dispatched to the afterlife in Kyoto by a jacked assassin who makes the police look like a joke. Meanwhile, a cowardly politician crawls to the temple where Aoshi is practicing his depressed statue cosplay, begging for protection, only to get a firm no to the face from Misao, who swears the emo has retired his blades. Examining the threat letters with old Okina, they notice the letters are written in Portuguese, proving the criminal is not only a psychopath, but a fan of codfish and a Christian history enthusiast. Under the protection of useless guards, the politician waits for his hour until a mysterious figure sweeps through the defense like dust. The meddlesome Misao tries to intervene, but takes a bizarre spell right to the forehead and passes out until Aoshi appears to rescue the damsel. In Tokyo, the gang receives an urgent messenger from Kyoto, and the vagabond redhead runs to whimper for answers in the lap of his roistering master. Hiko spills the gossip that the villain of the week is a failed ex-student of the Hiten Mitsurugi style, who supposedly packed it in years ago but actually fled the country and is now returned teaching the secret techniques around town. As every egocentric villain needs a theatrical entrance, the letters promise blood right when the sun vanishes in the middle of the day. And sure enough, while a major solar eclipse plunges Kenshin, Sanosuke, and Yahiko into the darkness of a useless hike for clues, the sun is swallowed by the moon. Near the Kyoto police station, Shogo materializes his nefarious presence in the gloom, walking slowly to deliver free humiliation to the officers. Plunged into the darkness of the eclipse, Broomhead Cho thinks he's going to show off with his squad, but he is summarily crushed by Shogo with a single humiliating blow, making the cowardly guards run with wet pants. At the hospital, the bandaged blonde vomits the pill of despair, warning Kenshin that the dark rookie is stupidly stronger than him. Away from this depression, Sano sniffs out trouble in a damp cave where Japanese Christians are playing secret cult, led by the Magdalia and her pet brute Lorenzo. When corrupt cops decide to fan the flames and try to forcibly snatch the lady's sacred medallion, the street brawler hands out free punches thinking he'd come out as the great savior. As a reward for his unsolicited charity, Sanosuke gets a punch to his pride and a stinging slap to the face delivered by the ungrateful damsel herself.
Didn't even break a sweat. Hey there, Missy. You okay? Huh?
To make matters worse, Lorenzo knocks the interloper straight into the river with his dignity shredded, though the troublemaker keeps clutching the stolen medallion in his fist. Trying to put the puzzle together, the freeloading manslayer visits a blind, decrepit expert named Hyo-e Nishida. The old man drops an info dump revealing that his nephew Shogo tore out his eyes and his authority after a family fight over using extreme methods in the revolution. As soon as he finishes vomiting the dramatic script begging them to stop the maniac, the old man drops dead. During the makeshift midnight burial, Shogo and Magdalia sprout from the shadows just to pay some fake funeral respect. Ending the scene, the villain throws a challenge at Kenshin's head, telling him to show up in Shimabara if he's man enough to try and stop the massacre. The ragtag crew of loafers disembarks in Shimabara, where the Western architecture has Misao salivating with anticipation to stuff her face with castella cake. Their sightseeing is brutally interrupted when Yahiko takes a moving carriage directly to the face. The hit and run loses all importance when the posh foreigner inside recognizes the redhead. It's Ambassador Elston, a big shot from Holland who owes his life to the days when Kenshin was busy slitting throats during the Bakumatsu. Refugeed in the foreigner's luxury mansion, they discuss the recent carnage with a skeptical secretary who completely scoffs at Shogo's rebellion. Meanwhile, Sanosuke wanders the streets drooling like a nostalgic idiot, recalling the painful slap he took from Magdalia. Magdalia, aboard a ship with the executioner Shogo, Shogo heading for Shimabara, plays completely dumb when questioned about her runaway locket. In a hideout that would make any mobster jealous, Shogo sneers at the cheap tricks squeezed out by his subordinate Kaio to deceive the populace, while Magdalia pounds away at a piano. When alerted to the arrival of the red-headed swordsman, Shogo guarantees that the honor of slicing the protagonist will be exclusively his. In the dead of night, the hero's beach camp is ruined by angry brats trying to stone Kaoru and Yahiko before vanishing, crumbling with fear and leaving behind a pendant identical to the Christian girl's. Kenshin and Sanosuke go poking around a suspicious cave and run into Gaspar, a chubby henchman who whistles frantically to release a pack of dogs thirsty for human flesh. The self-proclaimed heroes run with their tails between their legs, culminating in the supreme humiliation of the legendary warrior being captured and tied up like a salami by the sadistic fat man. Meanwhile, the meddling Kaoru slips through a secret passage, falls into a subterranean cathedral, and hits the bad luck jackpot by running straight into Shogo himself praying at the altar, who pierces her with a murderous gaze. Trapped in the damp cave, Kenshin and Sanosuke become gourmet snacks for Gaspar's pack of rabid mutts. The sadistic fat man binds the redhead in chains like a circus attraction, accusing him of being a hitman for hire, but the piece lasts a mere 3 seconds. The protagonist flexes a muscle, shatters the chains, and sends Gaspar into such a shameful wipeout that his dog whistle turns to dust on the floor, leaving the pups totally out of control. Deep in the hole, Sanosuke escapes the canine onslaught by climbing a giant stalagmite, but since his brain is the size of a pea, the idiot starts gloating and dancing for the dogs, letting Magdalia's coveted locket slip from his pocket. In a pathetic attempt to recover the jewel, the brute plummets into the cave's abyss like a sack of potatoes. Outside, the useless Yahiko strolls along the beach and spots Santo disembarking from a ship to conspire with Kaio. Returning to the League of the Humiliated, Kenshin makes the mistake of being too nice and saves the useless Gaspar from becoming dog food. For the second time in the same day, the fat man chains the hero, this time to a tree on the edge of a sea cliff, to wait for the Magdalia to decide his fate. The sickly girl arrives with her fanatical squad, accompanied by Kaoru and Shogo. Kenshin tries the diplomatic route, shoving a letter from their old master in the false prophet's face, but Shogo spits on the paperwork, calling it all a lie. To prove his ego is bigger than his brain, Shogo resorts to physical violence. Kenshin, in an act of supreme arrogance disguised as mercy, uses a secondary skill just to avoid slicing the villain in half. Offended by not receiving the full penetration of the opponent's blade, Shogo throws a divine flashbang called Rai Ryu Sen in the redhead's face. The flash sends Kenshin flying straight into the depths of the ocean. When Kaoru and Yahiko finally fish the soggy ginger out of the water, they discover the worst possible news. Shogo's holy light fried the protagonist's retinas, leaving him blinder than a bat in a gunfight. In the comfort of a seaside mansion, Magdalia pounds the piano keys, while Shogo inflates his own ego, reliving the moment he fried the protagonist's eyes. Far from such luxuries, Sanosuke wakes up battered in the cave's sewer. Defying common sense, Magdalia finds the brute in the dark, ignores the warnings of her private bodyguard Lorenzo, and drags the wounded enemy to an isolated room to apply ointment to his wounds. Things heat up. There's some aggressive flirting, but the romance dies the moment Sanosuke confesses he lost the holy locket she cherished. Consumed by rage, she locks the idiot in the room and goes to fetch a heater to fill him with lead. When Magdalia returns armed to the teeth to execute the prisoner, she finds the rascal has escaped through the window, leaving a romantic note promising to find the lost jewel. Meanwhile, the evil committee holds a meeting. Shogo preaches pacifism like a dreamy hippie, little knowing that the conspirators Kaio and Santo plan to use him purely as cannon fodder to incite a national bloodbath. In a crumbling shack, Kenshin wakes up looking like a mummy, while Kaoru plays seamstress with his pants. The redhead goes full Matt Murdock, claiming his blindness has magically sharpened all his body's receptors in the blink of an eye, and that the only acceptable ophthalmic cure is to beat the cult leader senseless to master his flashy technique. Scurrying through tunnels like a sewer rat, Sanosuke bumps into Lorenzo. The henchman throws punches that cut the air, but our brawler's monkey brain copies the technique instantly, wrecking the big guy before nearly fainting from exhaustion. Sharing a moment of mutual pity fueled by childhood memories, Lorenzo lets his prey escape. The gossip spreads fast when Misao finally appears at the hero's hideout, bringing the criminal records of the religious siblings. Simultaneously, the henchmen find the lost jewelry and hand it over to Kaio. Completely lost in her own hormones and lamenting her encounter with Sanosuke, Magdalia goes to cry at the altar of her subterranean cathedral, only to trigger the ultimate cliché and start coughing a pool of blood onto the sacred floor. Classic tuberculosis. It's time for the long-awaited tragic flashback, delivered by Misao's big mouth. She spills the beans, revealing that all of the false messiah Shogo's miraculous cures and weather control were nothing more than a Western science degree. The nutjob imported foreign science fairs to play Jesus, but ironically can't use his basic biology to heal the wounds of his own sister, who is silently inheriting their mother's lethal disease while fainting on the cold floor of the secret church. To the delight of sadists, we discover their family operated like wealthy little Christians playing hide-and-seek in old Japan. After the Inquisition wiped the floor with their father, their kind master bundled the kids onto a boat, where Shogo spent the last few years cultivating a thirst for revenge worthy of a prime-time soap opera. Back in the present, the band of slackers goes to investigate the port in the dead of night. The newly blind Kenshin strolls through the potholes with the arrogance of someone with 4K resolution eyes, claiming he can now suck information out of the wind and footsteps like a super-developed sonar. The excursion bears fruit as they catch Santo playing with signal lights on a ship, sending Morse code to assemble a heavy troop. But before the heroic celebration can start, a completely invisible nylon wire sprouts at the blind protagonist's throat and begins to throttle the life out of him. Meanwhile, in the stone dungeons, the incompetent and repentant Gaspar does his one good deed of the season by gossiping to the sick girl that the sadistic Kaio snatched her precious jewel. The girl goes into the villain's room and finds her jewel, but she's rewarded with a terrible bonus prize, a bizarre painting of her own brother pinned to a cross. Like a bargain bin antagonist reeking of cliches, Kaio emerges from the shadows to tear up the script, spoon-feeding her the plan. He intends to kill Shogo tomorrow to profit from the idolatry of the boy's corpse. Surprising a grand total of 0 people, Sanosuke and his buff ex-rival Lorenzo were hiding, playing eavesdropper at the same door. They jump out with fire in their eyes to protect the blood-coughing damsel. Sanosuke warms up his fists to crush the traitorous little villain's ribs, but Kaio doesn't even need to break a sweat. He simply pulls a lever from the Woody Woodpecker trap shop, imprisoning the trio of suckers in a metal cage before burying it under a humiliating storm of rocks. After that ridiculous rock shower, Sanosuke, Lorenzo, and the dying Magdalia survive like untouchable nuclear cockroaches. Meanwhile, the blind protagonist is playing human piñata, tied by the neck to a rope by a useless henchman named Miguel. The madman pulls Kenshin up a cliff, and not even Misao's kunai can cut the wire. But Kenshin simply draws his reverse blade sword, slices the rope, and sends the guy back to the ground with a single, humiliating blow. The idiot was using a genuine katana and got beat by a piece of blunt metal, just like you getting beat down by life. Down below, Sanosuke lifts a massive boulder to save Lorenzo, but Magdalia collapses from exhaustion, proving she has the stamina of an 80-year-old smoker. Suddenly, a generic henchman appears swinging a spiked iron ball. Sano unleashes a brutal flurry of blows on him while Misao and Yahiko help finish off the punching bag in a cowardly fashion. Lorenzo hits the turbo to warn Shogo of Kaio's betrayal, while Kenshin gives a medical diagnosis pulled out of a hat. Magdalia has tuberculosis. Sano picks up the blood-coughing girl and runs like a desperate marathoner after Ambassador Elston. At the beach, Lorenzo catches the traitor Kaio trying to escape in a leaky boat. Our holy beefcake takes a beating at first, but resorts to the caveman plan B and hurls the thick homemade bombs he swallowed from Sanosuke earlier. The explosion turns the sadistic villain into flying mincemeat, solving the problem in a wonderfully loud way, just as the Japanese army finishes surrounding the mountain. With the Japanese army licking their chops to machine gun everyone, Kenshin's crew splits up. The protagonist, who runs masterfully through forest pitfalls despite not seeing an inch in front of his nose, goes to try and stop Shogo. At the top of the hill, the false messiah and Gaspar are performing heavy brainwashing on the crowd, promising VIP tickets to paradise even for the children, who have perfectly accepted turning into human Swiss cheese for Jesus. Kenshin delays the army's front line pretending he has X-ray vision, while Sanosuke stuffs Magdalia into a rowboat to save some shoe leather. When they get back to running, they collide with Ambassador Elston's luxury carriage, traveling with the suited conspirator Santo. The foreigner examines the girl, lets out a heavy sigh, and decrees that her lungs have already turned into terminal gelatin. Realizing the jig is up, Santo decides the best way to hide his guilt in the rebellion is to erase the witnesses, pulling a shiny revolver to put a hole in Elston's head. But in an act worthy of a primetime drama, the near-dead Magdalia jumps in front and swallows the hot bullet with her own chest. Sanosuke completely loses it, knocking out Santo and his henchmen in one blow and smashing their faces into the ground to snatch back the stolen locket. Elston hauls tail to stop the general massacre, leaving Sanosuke alone on the asphalt with the dying girl. In a moment of pure tragic essence, she cries, squeezes the locket, hands a spit-covered letter for her brother, and finally kicks the bucket in the brawler's arms. Back at death camp, Shogo feels a shiver down his spine, signaling his sister is history. He gets distracted like a rookie and takes a grazing shot from some random extra. As he freaks out seeing his faithful being perforated, Kenshin emerges from nowhere, demanding to settle everything with swords and motivational speeches before the kids lose their heads. The brawl at the top of the mountain is about to break all viewership records when Kaoru, Yahiko, and Gaspar arrive out of breath, only to find the blind Kenshin facing off against the stubborn false messiah. Meanwhile, near the tactical camp, Misao is grabbed by two frustrated soldiers and taken to the commander, pleading for a pause to negotiate. The arrogant military man ignores the brat and orders everyone to cock their biggest guns. Fortunately, the suited Elston arrives, kicking the camp door down and pulling a massive diplomatic power move. He threatens to cut off all of Japan's foreign money and ships if the army keeps playing target practice with the Christians. The commander swallows his pride and grants a humiliating 1-hour truce. Misao promises to release a smoke signal if the swordsman's intensive therapy works, and races up the slope. In the main dirt arena, Kenshin throws it in Shogo's face that sticking a blade in people's throats isn't what religion commands. The duel explodes, and using his bat radar, the protagonist parries and attacks with the same violence as when he had eyeballs. The climax hits hard when both prepare the ultimate attack of the same assassin school. At the exact moment of collision, Shogo is hit by a dramatic flashback of his parents breaking his concentration. He hesitates for a pathetic millisecond, and Kenshin wipes him off the map in the blink of an eye. Defeated and biting the dust, Shogo tearfully begs to be dispatched to the next world, but the pacifist protagonist obviously denies the request. The herd of survivors surrounds their broken leader, begging him not to abandon the ship. In a ridiculous script miracle that offends any biology textbook,
Everyone here loves you with all of their hearts.
Kenshin's eyes simply turn back on by themselves, proving that anime blindness is just some nonsense curable by a good fight. Kaoru sheds waterfalls of joy, Misao lights the bonfire at the peak, and the rising smoke shuts down the Japanese army's weapons for good. Days after the military mess, we see the bone-headed Sanosuke dragging his depression through the streets until he spots a girl in a western pink dress, who, surprisingly, is the little thief Misao trying to cosplay as a civilized human being. The squad of loafers gathers for the most important debate of the day, deciding between eating cake or noodles, completely ignoring that Kenshin is breaking a sweat trying to save the false messiah from death row. Luckily, the suited diplomat Elston throws all his European weight onto the Japanese government. The politician Kawaji warns that Shogo's head will stay on his neck, but the entire sect has been kicked to the curb and will be summarily exiled from Japan. But Elston, acting as their golden ticket to salvation, arranges a one-way cruise to Holland, ensuring the fanatics will do their praying far away from Kyoto. Meanwhile, Kaoru plays mailman and delivers a package to the prisoner's cell containing his late sister's letter and locket. On the other side of town, Sanosuke holds his therapy session in the cemetery in front of Magdalia's headstone, accompanied by Lorenzo, who is drowning in guilt for helping blow the fat Kaio to bits. On the day of the great embarkation, the gang says their goodbyes at the pier. The Christians even try to drag the protagonist to Holland with them, but Kenshin skillfully dodges the international invitation because he prefers to keep sleeping for free on the floor of a poor dojo in Tokyo. Shogo reads his sister's final letter, thanks the pacifist swordsman for punching some sense into his head, and boards the ship, sailing toward a new life in the land of windmills. Stuck in the waiting line for a boat, the unemployment brigade decides to blow money they don't have at a fugu, pufferfish, restaurant. Their chewing is interrupted by a gang of drunks called the Tengu, who demand free sake and end up swallowing Misao and Yahiko's fists for dessert. When the thugs draw their blades, a nutjob with a theater actor's pose jumps into the middle of the restaurant, displays a cross-shaped scar made with a marker, and screams to the world that he is the legendary Batosai. The bandits flee, reeking of fear, and the fake assassin even collects tips from the audience. While Kenshin doesn't mind having his identity stolen by a clown, the gang tracks the forger to a crumbling temple dubbed Himura Dojo. When they knock, the imposter notices the protagonist's useless sword and assumes he's just a fan begging for lessons, forcing the original manslayer to train by swinging wood while taking corrective fan slaps to the back. The gang was about to grind the scammer into paste when a herd of orphaned children sprouts from the house, activating the anime sentimentality trap card. It turns out the imposter used the weight of the famous name purely to beg for food for the war-traumatized brats. But the charade sours when the Tengu gang returns, escorting a real mercenary named Jurobe. The amateur cosplayer runs for his life until he's cornered, admitting in tears that he's nothing but a failed toad oil salesman. Before he becomes wallpaper, Kenshin intervenes, reveals who actually patented the title of manslayer, and shuts down the mercenary with a single scabbard strike to the skull.
It can't be.
Inspired by the miracle of being alive, the salesman finds his courage and wipes out the thugs threatening the kids. In the end, at the docks, the protagonist officially authorizes the oil salesman to keep prostituting his legendary name to ensure the orphans get their rations. After a naval mishap forces them into a humiliating trek up a mountain, the gang checks into the most luxurious suite at a Shinto inn in Hakone. But since Luck absolutely loathes this group, Kaoru discovers she left all their cash with Kenshin, who miraculously managed to lose it all along the way. Without a cent to avoid being tossed in jail, the squad is enslaved by management, scrubbing floors to work off the debt. Trying to wash away their dignity at the end of the shift, Kaoru and Misao soak in the hot springs. Suddenly, the pint-sized thief detects a foreign body in a tree and launches a flying bucket straight into a pervert's face. After the men of the group storm the scene armed with more buckets, they discover the knocked-out spy is Ryosaburo, a freshman student of Western art. Misao tries to puff out her chest to be his muse, but the artist crushes her ego by claiming he was only drooling over Kaoru's beauty. In the dark of the room, the heiress of the Kamiya Kashin style poses for the boy's painting. Things get weird when the nutjob blathers that painting her exterior isn't enough, declaring his deepest desire is to penetrate deep and capture the soft interior of her emotions. This is immediately followed by a cringeworthy love confession that makes Kaoru practically evaporate from the room. Sanosuke tries to convince the simp to get over it, but the teenager loses it over the rejection and tries to leap out the window into the great beyond. To tame the hysteria, Misao and Sano cook up a ridiculous challenge. If the painter can land a single hit on Kenshin with a wooden sword by sunset, he'll earn their love mentorship. The kid spends the next few hours furiously swinging his wood at the swordsman without touching a single hair on Kenshin's head. During a final offensive in the middle of the woods, he trips and smashes a nest of killer bees.
Oh no!
Kenshin! Stay back, Miss Kaoru! Those things are wasps! Kenshin!
Kenshin shreds the swarm with a gust of wind and dirt, allowing Kaoru to crawl over and treat the boy's stings with exaggerated tenderness. Feeding off the couple's sticky energy, the painter hits an epiphany and finishes his masterpiece. In the morning, the proletarian slavery ends, and the simp delivers the wrapped painting to his snobby muse. Back on the road, surrounded by the group's hungry curiosity, Kaoru unwraps the piece of artistic trash only to find herself drawn so poorly that she suffers an immediate meltdown, chasing her own harem down the road, screaming for the rest of the trip. Our troop of slackers is walking back from a restaurant with full bellies when they stumble upon a four-eyed nerd in Western clothes, scribbling math equations on a stick and swearing to a crowd that man will one day walk on the moon. Naturally, everyone mocks the lunatic and leaves, proving that humanity has always hated a know-it-all. Kenshin tries to give the boy a pep talk, while Yahiko gets real and tells him the whole thing is nonsense. The nerd introduces himself as Daigo Ro, but before a friendship can bloom, an old man in a formal kimono calls for the boy. On their way, a street gang spawns out of nowhere to shake the old man down. Instead of manning up, Daigo Ro uses the elder's back as a human shield. Sanosuke and Yahiko, who were following the loser just to return some books he dropped, dive into some gratuitous violence, soon joined by Kenshin and Kaoru to sweep the scum off the asphalt. The old man recognizes the protagonist's scar, but before anything useful happens, a carriage screeches to a halt and a tall maniac named Tetsuma hops out swinging a western saber, swearing to protect the master, though he's magically late for the entire fight. The old man reveals himself to be Kaishu Katsu, and in a fit of rudeness, kicks Daigo Ro out of his tutelage for being a crybaby coward.
Daigo, don't set one foot onto my estate until you gain some skill with the sword.
Are you serious?
Let's go, Tetsuma.
Kaoru, who can't see a stray soul without wanting to adopt it, drags the nerd back to the dojo. The next morning, the old man's daughter, Itsuko, gets into a shouting match with her father, and also decides to move into the Kamiya dojo after seeing the boy won't budge, turning the place into a literal asylum for rejects. While the socialite proves she's at least good for cooking, Kenshin goes to interrogate the lonely old man in the dark. Katsu is cool as a cucumber, reminiscing about the revolution when he almost had his jugular sliced by the Batasai himself. After this bizarre moment of nostalgia, Kenshin heads home, only for the same gang of incompetent extras to pop out of the shadows to block his path, thirsty for another beating. In the middle of the dark street, Kenshin is cornered by a horde of masked goons calling themselves the Beniaoi group, swearing vengeance against Kaishu Katsu. However, their scumbag leader, Shibata, takes one look at the redhead, realizes that trying to shank the protagonist would be a massive headache, and magically decides Kenshin isn't an enemy, breaking the tension and vanishing into the night. In the following days, the routine at the Kamiya Asylum continues. Daigo Ro tries swinging his wood during kendo practice, while Itsuko puts on the housemaid's apron. The nerd decides to spill some vital lore, revealing that old man Katsu was the genius who peacefully surrendered Edo Castle during the revolution, and now the federal government is convinced he's sitting on the shogun's secret fortune. But the real action happens when the sadistic Kaoru drags the useless nerd into a sparring match. Predictably, Daigo Ro's back snaps on the first impact, and he has to be tossed onto a futon. Itsuko locks the door to tend to his intimate injuries, but the whispers and moans leaking through the cracks make the gang's brains melt. Thinking the girl was applying her magic ointment to the nerd's wood with way too much passion, Kaoru and Sanosuke grab Kenshin and Yahiko by the ears and flee the room, leaving the lovebirds to sweat it out under the sheets. On that frustrating night, Itsuko is cooking for the bunch of parasites when she notices an ingredient is missing. In a massive lapse of judgment, she leaves the pans with the lethal chef, Kaoru, and goes out alone to shop in the dark. To the surprise of absolutely no one, the Beniaoi group appears out of thin air and bags the girl.
And what do you want with me if I am?
We'd like you to come with us.
Kenshin follows the trail of incompetence, finds the poor girl's hairpin on the street, and deduces the obvious kidnapping, just as fireworks explode in the sky to make the scene absurdly dramatic. The search party returns to the dojo empty-handed and looking like fools. Daigo Ro starts sweating buckets over his almost girlfriend's disappearance, while back at the Katsu mansion, the depressed old man just reflects on the threatening letter and uses his screen time for a useless flashback to the day his beloved shogun handed over the keys to the city under diplomatic pressure. Kenshin invades the old man's house for a midnight therapy session, and the elder declares with suicidal pomp that he'll surrender to the Beniaoi in exchange for his daughter's safety. The moment Kenshin steps outside, he's surrounded by his gossiping troupe demanding answers. He drops the bomb that Itsuko has been taken hostage, nearly giving Daigo Ro a heart attack. Meanwhile, in some alleyway of pure narrative convenience, the fancy-pants swordsman Tetsuma is plotting with a thug in the shadows. The guy is planning his own master's downfall out of pure spite, seething with envy because the old man idolizes a spineless nerd instead of him. In a stinking hideout, Itsuko wakes up only to be forced to swallow Shibata's cliché monologue. The villain spits out his trauma, recounting how the shogun's followers were banished, lost their lands, and starved to death, justifying his crimes with a heavy dose of resentment and hatred toward the Meiji authorities. Later, Katsu marches to the slaughter clutching his katana, while Kenshin's crew plays stalker in the bushes. The old man demands to see his daughter, and Shibata puts the hostage on display. At that exact millisecond, Daigo-ro's tiny brain short-circuits. Clutching only his training stick, the Virgin charges into the middle of the arena in a ridiculous suicidal surge. All-out chaos breaks out, but the nerd focuses desperately on the leader to try and play the romantic hero. Shibata barely has to blink. He parries the useless strike and buries his blade deep into the boy's abdomen, delivering the visceral penetration the poor kid definitely didn't want to experience today. Daigo-ro's fish brain takes a sword to the gut, and while Itsuko screams like a broken siren, Kenshin is busy trading blows with Shibata. Mid-fight, the villain decides this is the perfect time for a useless flashback about his sad days of poverty, only for Kenshin to immediately mop the floor with his face. The terrified troupe rushes to Daigo-ro's perforated body, but guess what? The useless nerd stands up like he just woke up from a nap. Turns out he stuffed a massive Jules Verne book under his clothes, granting him the most cliché plot armor in the history of fiction to keep his virginity intact. With the mess cleared up, the police arrive to play janitor. Chief Uramura mentions they received 2 tips about the attack. At the Katsu mansion, the dandy Tetsuma is tossing the place looking for a treasure map to the old guard's money, but Katsu catches him red-handed. The traitor admits to being the brains behind the Beni Aoi faction, justifying it by saying he needs the cash to fuel his political ambitions. At that second, the Kenshin squad arrives to spoil the party for good. Tetsuma tries his 5th-rate Western fencing in the garden and takes a humiliating beating. Desperate over his own incompetence, the coward pulls a gun.
I'm not.
However, Daigo-ro jumps in front to deliver a cheap motivational speech, saying Tetsuma is smart enough to have a brilliant career without robbing someone's piggy bank. Completely defeated by the power of talk no jutsu, the traitor surrenders. Later, back at the dojo during a moment of calm, Kenshin realizes the damn treasure map was stuffed inside Daigo-ro's chewed-up book the whole time, but he plays dumb and leaves the scrap of paper there. Shibata gets a get-out-of-jail-free card, crosses paths with a caged Tetsuma, and finally makes peace with old man Katsu. Fulfilling their drama quota, Daigo-ro and Itsuko pack their bags and head home from the dojo. Over in Germany, on a foggy night worthy of a B-list horror movie, a bunch of goons trash an entire house hunting for a valuable item, only to deduce their target slipped through their fingers and took the goods to Japan. Returning to the Kamiya dojo in Tokyo, the squad catches Sanosuke frying his last 2 brain cells in a game of shogi against a distinguished foreign gentleman. To Yahiko's absolute delight, the annoying rich brat Yutaro is back in town, bringing his uncle Hans along. The boy shows off his newly healed arm and swings his blade with sharp Western fencing skills, proving that European money can even buy physical talent. Meanwhile, at the German embassy, a band of thugs calling themselves the Black Knights are terrorizing the ambassador, demanding Hans and Yutaro's whereabouts while exuding that unbearable villain asking for a beating arrogance. In the dead of night, old man Hans is breaking a cold sweat drawing a mysterious map while his nephew snores away, ignoring the looming danger. The next day, the gang pretends everything is normal, training at the dojo and heading to the Akabeko to stuff their faces. While they chew, the Germans raid Hans's place and turn it into a dump looking for the map. When the uncle and the boy decide to head home, Kenshin's trouble radar pings violently, and he follows them from the shadows. His intuition was spot on, as the Black Knights leap from the dark to slice up the tourists. Kenshin jumps in, cracking skulls to defend them, but Hans still manages the feat of letting the foreigners penetrate deep into his shoulder before they vanish into the night. Dropped off at Dr. Oguni's clinic, Hans admits the intruders felt him up and took his map, but confesses to hiding a backup clue in the back of the Kamiya dojo. While the Black Knights pop champagne celebrating the theft, a completely random female ninja spawns in the room demanding the paperwork. Instead of the expected bloodbath, the scum take one look at each other and decide to form the worst cooperative alliance this country has ever seen.
I apologize for our rude behavior. I'm a chivalrous man. It goes against my code of honor to treat ladies poorly.
Agonizing on a stinking bed with leaking wounds, the near-corpse Dr. Hans shoves a weird stone into Yutaro's hands, dumping the responsibility of shielding the divine elixir from the villain's greedy paws onto the boy. Milliseconds after this melancholy exchange, the room is kicked in by Misanagi, the boss of the Sonata ninjas, escorting her troop of German brutes. Later, the Kenshin crew huddles up to decode Old Man Hans' paperwork. Yutaro squeezes his brain translating the Latin scribbles, revealing that the map and the rock point to a legendary potion with the ridiculous power to cure any existing disease, and the Black Knights are salivating to inject that juice into their world domination project. The pathetic riddle spits out something about the Sea of Suwa and 4 dragons, forcing the gang to pack their bags and march to the province. In the filthy shadows, Misanagi seals her demonic alliance with the canned meat giants, trading her clan's local myth for the keys to Japan. Obviously, the poor girl has no idea the Europeans are going to stab her in the back and toss her body in the gutter the moment they suck the elixir dry. Arriving at a sacred shrine, a random priest delivers a mouthful of exposition to our slow-witted heroes, translating that the dragons are actually 4 pillars and vomiting trivia about a winter weather anomaly. In the middle of this forced tourism, the Sonata Ninja Squad pops out of the bushes for an ambush. Kenshin and Sanosuke start tenderizing the masked meat, getting sudden backup from the Kyoto spies led by the pint-sized stalker Misao, who was sniffing out the suspicious clan like a rabid bloodhound. At the villain's hideout, the German leader Melders coldly slices a dissident ninja lackey just to reaffirm who has the biggest member in the room. Exuding pure strategic laziness, the captain decides to leave the heavy lifting to Kenshin, planning to snatch the elixir bottle right out of their hands afterward. Realizing the trap, Kenshin's group merges with Misao's ninjas and heads straight for the enemy fortress, looking to cause as much damage as possible. Kenshin's troop continues their exhausting mountain trek after the blessed divine elixir, but Yahiko's bird brain decides that drinking water from a random puddle is a great idea, earning him an instant fever. Out of nowhere, a one-eyed hunter pops out of the shadows offering shelter and syrup, warning them to stay far away from Lake Ryujin because the dragons there tend to scream a lot. Obviously, someone forgot to tell our slow heroes that the Good Samaritan was a Sonata ninja in disguise who had tied the original owner in the basement to trick the tourists.
Forget about what happened today. Do that and I'll let you live in peace.
Ignoring the imaginary danger sign, the gang marches to the lake and watches the moon's gravity pull the water back, revealing the wet floor in a Moses-style miracle. They trek through the mud until they stumble upon a tiger statue hiding the VIP entrance to an underground theme park. The place is a blatant Indiana Jones ripoff, packed with pressure plates and crushing walls that only fail to turn everyone into pate because Sanosuke and Kenshin use muscles instead of brains to hold back the tragedy. At the end of the hall, Yutaro rubs his brain cells together and decides to play a video game, shoving Uncle Hans's stone into a statue to open the door to a giant Buddha. The boy finds the secret switch, believing he's beaten the game, but the cutscene is abruptly interrupted by the Black Knights and Misanagi, who appear clapping slowly. It's clear the clever villains used Kenshin as a pack mule to disarm all the traps for free. Misanagi lets out a villainous giggle, explains the riddle pointed to the bottom of the pit, and hits the trapdoor button, sending our protagonists sliding down into the darkness, proving that suckers get exactly what's coming to them. Plummeting down Misanagi's slide, Kenshin's group lands at the bottom of an abyss filled with sulfuric gas, breathing in the Earth's toxic farts, while the VIP Black Knights walk a safe route, enjoying stalactites engraved with the Western alphabet. Trapped in the gas chamber and terrified of exploding if anyone dares rub 2 rocks together, they decide subtlety is dead. Sanosuke simply decides to punch geology itself, battering the stone wall until he triggers an underground tsunami that washes away the filth and spits everyone out into a forest beneath the earth. There, they find a perforated Sonata ninja named Kaita, who tries to act tough before pathetically passing out. Yutaro decides today is the day to play Grey's Anatomy. He refuses to abandon the enemy punching bag and shoves his own hands into boiling water to sterilize his fingers, enduring the pain of someone frying pastries on a Sunday to perform improvised surgery on the thug. Moved by seeing a brat cook his own skin for him, Kaita gets a generic heroic redemption arc and agrees to be the group's GPS, pointing out a secret shortcut. As the German knights sink deeper into the catacombs, the new guide leads the heroes to some ancient western ruins. Unfortunately, the welcome committee consists of what's left of the ninja elite, the thugs Zan and Ren. Sano takes on Zan head-to-head, while Kenshin has to deal with the nervous lashing of Ren, who swings a bizarre whip shaped like two snakes, dying to give the redhead a thrashing.
Double Serpent Chibashi!
All hell breaks loose in the cave as the elite ninja trio shows they are experts at torturing our protagonists. Sanosuke, with his right hand completely mangled, gets schooled by a brute swinging a razor-sharp spear, while Kenshin dances like an idiot to dodge a whip cracking in his face. To make the humiliation worse, Karu and the dead weight are cornered by a creep hanging from the ceiling who controls bats, using winged noise pollution to fry the redhead's top-tier hearing with a buzz that sounds like an amateur rock concert. The kamikaze brawler throws himself like a human bowling ball, taking the brute down. Meanwhile, Kenshin effortlessly shatters the whip and knocks the madman out. Deep in the shadows, the Black Knight's board of directors, led by Melders, finally finds the so-called divine elixir, which turns out to be nothing more than a garden of weeds that glow in the dark. Misanagi reaches out her hand, demanding the keys to Japan as payment, but Melders laughs in her face, making the century's most predictable betrayal official by declaring he doesn't do business with local trash. He orders the poor woman to be sliced, but his lieutenant, Schneider, has a sudden spike of empathy. Absorbing Kenshin's sword is for protecting speech, he blocks the blow.
Schneider!
Trying to play the new anime protagonist against his sociopathic boss, he receives an instant and humiliating beatdown. Just as Melders raises his blade to clean up the corporate mess, Kenshin and the gang burst into the room, ruining the execution with that cliché timing that never fails. Deep inside the cave, the circus hits its peak when Melders decides to play rodeo while wearing a walking sardine can. The leader of the Black Knights tramples Kenshin with an armored horse and a giant lance, mocking the redhead's rusty toothpick and revealing his brilliant plan to use the divine plants to become the master of the world. Kenshin tries to dent the European scrap metal with the Kuzu Ryu Sen, but the attack only serves to polish the sociopath's armor. Realizing that headbutting a medieval tank is a fool's errand, Kenshin sheathes his sword to pull out his protagonist's cheat code. He unleashes the Amakakaru Ryu no Hirameki, and the absurd speed creates a celestial vacuum cleaner that sucks the fire from the environment, turning the arrogant knight into canned Beeb Q. The problem is that the fire spirals out of control, turning the precious elixir garden into a giant ashtray. While the lackey Schneider desperately tries to put out the fire with his bare hands, Melders accepts defeat and decides to burn along with his dream of world domination. Outside, the ninja leader cries, apologizing for ruining everything, but the clan elders surprisingly give her a pass, forgiving the general incompetence. The cherry on top comes from Dr. Hans, who miraculously saved a single magic onion from the fire and uses the botanical juice to fix Yutaro's arm. Inspired by the magic of medicine and realizing that swinging a sword has no future, the kid gives up the life of a slasher. He cries buckets at the port and boards a ship for Germany, trading his blade for a medical degree and leaving our pacifist protagonist behind. At the Kamiya dojo, Misao mops the floor with Yahiko's face during practice, mercilessly rubbing it in that her ninja skills are far superior. She gleefully ignores a letter from Okina asking her to return to Kyoto, thinking the old man just wants to kill her vibe. But her toughness melts instantly when her Oni Waban group gang knocks on the door, accompanied by the Dark Lord himself, Aoshi. Bouncing with joy at the sight of her emo crush, she agrees to go home, but invents a flimsy excuse about taking the ladies on a Tokyo sightseeing tour first. Smelling that the girls are going to gorge themselves on good food without them, Sano and Yahiko start following the girls like two starving maniacs. Meanwhile, Aoshi and Kenshin have a retiree meeting over a quiet cup of tea, with the ninja leader watching in shock at how the legendary manslayer has turned into a full-time babysitter. In the city, the girls pray at a temple and gossip in a tea house, while Megumi takes the opportunity to spit some venom, mocking Misao's lack of curves. Sanosuke and Yahiko's pathetic spy squad continues to be an embarrassment, stuffing their faces from afar, and failing spectacularly to even notice a street urchin pickpocketing the elite fighter. The chase leads the thief to an alley full of generic thugs. When Sanosuke and Yahiko finally decide to jump out of the shadows to play the macho saviors, the women have already beaten everyone up on their own, leaving the boys looking like idiots.
What about our turn?
We didn't make it in time. Women sure are
scary.
As the sun sets over the river, the team reunites, and Misao hands Aoshi a paper balloon, a nostalgic toy that coaxes a rare smile out of the human statue from Kyoto. Despite the sweet mood, she suddenly announces she won't be going home the next day because she forgot to buy Okina's sweets, making it hilariously obvious she just wants to stay glued to her stoic master's side for a little longer. We rewind the clock to the glorious year of 1603, where two rival clans wage a magical war in the snow using Feng Shui powers, because apparently, swords went out of style in ancient Japan. The Wind Clan humiliates the Water Clan with a trick called the Phoenix Circle, forcing the losers to retreat while swearing generic revenge for future generations. Centuries later, during the Meiji era, Tokyo begins to suffer from a bizarre outbreak of random bad luck, with wells drying up and diseases popping up magically out of nowhere. Taking advantage of the chaos, a suit named Saeki appears at these cursed sites, acting like the world's worst real estate agent, claiming the local chi flow is clogged and offering cash to buy the ruined land. At the Kamiya dojo, the well water suddenly turns red and disgusting, looking like a scene from a low-budget horror movie. Saeki appears out of thin air with his bad energy talk, trying to buy the dojo, but Kaoru tells the charlatan to shove his offer and refuses to sell her legacy. Investigating the possessed plumbing, Kenshin and Sanosuke run into a weirdo leaning against the well who drops cryptic warnings about the coming danger. Not taking no for an answer, Saeki starts playing for keeps and uses his Feng Shui sorcery to start a fire in the Akabeko's kitchen, but the owner stands her ground and also refuses to give in to real estate whims. Even the police force and the old army brass start breaking a sweat over the mysterious expansion of the esoteric villain across the city. Frustrated by the protagonist's chronic stubbornness, Saeki returns to the dojo with his hired thugs and launches a supernatural wind attack so absurd it instantly paralyzes Kenshin, Sanosuke, and Yahiko, turning our plot-armored heroes into useless garden statues. Right at the millisecond, the main trio would be wiped off the map in humiliating fashion. That mysterious extra from the well leaps to the rescue. Revealing himself to be a real Feng Shui master, he cancels the villain's magic and pulls a damn map of Tokyo out of his pocket. Like any good exposition dump teacher, he shows that the recent incidents are drawing a giant pentagram to obliterate the entire city. This Windmaster does an exposition dump, revealing that Tokyo is protected by an invisible shield called the Circle of Eternity, and that the infamous Water Clan has crawled out of the historical sewers to mess up Japan's Feng Shui. We discover that the scammer Saeki isn't building a railroad, but rather digging a colossal hole to clog the Earth's magical veins. While the heroes play building inspector at the villain's construction site, the Water Clan attacks the Kamiya dojo. Kaoru tries to act like a club bouncer but fails miserably, swallowing a forbidden spell that infects her body with pure evil energy. Kenshin finds his emotional anchor passed out on the floor, while the rival leader, Reisui, mocks him. To prove he's not playing around, the villain activates a dirty trick that implodes the entire Ministry of Engineering under a magical collapse, signaling the urban apocalypse. As the enemies slip away after vandalizing public property, Jinpu gives the diagnosis every protagonist hates to hear. Kaoru's wound is fatal. She'll be pushing up daisies by sunset if they don't find a miracle cure in record time. The Water Clan continues its esoteric terrorist attack, blowing up the Ministry of Engineering with a colossal beam of pure magical hate. Back at the dojo, Kaoru's body begins to rot thanks to a ridiculous wound called the Reverse Dragon, which basically sucks all the bad energy from nature into her. Jinpu reveals that the only antidote is the healing water from the Dragon Spring in Musashino, the exact same oversized hole where the real estate villain Saeki is playing mole. Yahiko plays nurse to the dying girl, while Kenshin, Sanosuke, and Jinpu set off to try and steal the Holy Grail, while the police, led by Yamagata, raid Saeki's empty office looking like fools. The villain himself and Reisui obliterate the entire police department building just to test their magical aim. The master plan is clear. Fry the government officials in a massive spiritual BBQ to take over Japan. Jinpu turns Sano into a professional vandal, sending him to destroy specific monuments across the city to weaken the enemy's voodoo. Kenshin and Jinpu dive into the Musashino forest, getting free lectures on how seeking martial perfection leaves you isolated and friendless, just like you. After surviving an ambush filled with deadly traps in a dark tunnel, they reach the giant pentagram sealing the magic spring. Jinpu burns his own HP bar to break the lock, causing the cave to crumble as a green beam of pure energy bursts from the ground. The dynamic duo barely manages to bottle the healing fluids before the tunnel turns to dust, but watching the energy laser take off toward the northeast, Jinpu deduces that the villains are going to redirect this spiritual liquid straight from Nico to obliterate Tokyo's barrier. Fortunately, Kaoru receives the dragon spring fluids into her body and stops melting like a zombie from a cheap movie. With the damsel saved, Kenshin and Jinpu rush to Nico to stop the Water Clan from pumping the magical sewage flow, needing to find a legendary artifact called the Jade Crest to shut down the geological bomb. Meanwhile, Sanosuke and Aoshi form the worst detective duo in history and terrorize a corporate clerk until he gives up the location of an eccentric old academic. This senile scholar launches an entire book of exposition at them, revealing that the villains want to use a buried device to warp the underground chi paths. The key to this nonsense is supposedly hidden at the Yome Gate, but Reisui has already drawn circles around them and is performing his bizarre ritual at full power in Senjogahara. When Kenshin and Jinpu reach the gate, they find out the crest is faker than a $3 bill and fall face first into a magical barrier trap.
It's the Gyokuza no Jin!
Gyokuza no Jin?
Our protagonist is forced to fight hallucinations of skeletal samurai designed to swallow his sanity. Fortunately, he activates his plot armor and uses pure willpower to shatter the illusion, allowing the Wind Mage to destroy the glass prison. Back in Tokyo, Sanosuke and Aoshi finally play connect the dots on the map and discover that the real Apocalypse remote is in the ruins of a temple right in the capital, proving that the trip to Nico was a humiliating decoy. Realizing they swallowed the bait whole, Kenshin and Jinpu race desperately back to the ritual, but Saiki is already stroking the original artifact in his hands, ready to pour his destructive energy over the entire country. Right at the enemy fortress, the Water Gang decides to turn on the Feng Shui magic blender to finally shred Tokyo's spiritual barrier. Kenshin, Sanosuke, and the Wind Mage arrive just as the Apocalypse loading bar is almost full. Jinpu, suffering from an acute crisis of self-worth, decides that the best solution is to commit heroic suicide to cancel the technique. But Reisui steals the spotlight, jumps into the fire cauldron first, and turns himself into a mystical burnt offering just to make sure the aquatic mojo works his way. It's at this moment that the corrupt real estate agent reveals that his boss's toasty sacrifice was as useless as his own existence. Saiki pulls out the original version of the Jade Crest, laughs at his ally's charred corpse, and screams to the heavens that he will rule the new era alone. The energy flow starts leaking like a burst sewer pipe, threatening to vaporize the entire block. Jinpu again tries to throw himself into mortal danger to contain the explosion, proving he really is dodging his therapy sessions. Fed up with this nonsense, Kenshin blocks the kid's pathetic martyrdom attempt and uses his reverse blade sword to slice the dragon statues that were acting as the router for the mass destruction spell. Seeking to be useful to society, Sanosuke solves the problem of the indestructible millennial artifact in the most Neanderthal way possible, hurling a perfectly aimed rock that shatters the crest right in Saiki's palm. That's right, the supernatural apocalypse is cancelled by a flying brick. Without the magic pillars holding up the ceiling, the fortress collapses and completely flattens Saiki, squashing him into the floor like a smug cockroach. Jinpu finally understands that being alive has its perks.
Completely.
I trust you will take good care of Tokyo. No, of this country.
I will, sir, as long as I live.
The government officials lie to the public saying they didn't see anything unusual, and our heroes return to the dojo to continue breathing someone else's oxygen. Desperately needing a vacation from the parasites living in her house, Kaoru drags Kenshin on a boat trip for two, leaving the leeches to suck their thumbs in Tokyo, while Sanosuke tries to beg Dr. Megumi for food in exchange for chopping logs like a ripped, low-budget hobo. Yahiko spends his time at the restaurant spilling gossip about the protagonist's stagnant love life into his co-workers' listener's ears. After getting off the boat, the couple walks through a coastal town to visit a grave, but the weather gods decide to throw a cold bucket of water on the romantic mood by sending an absurdly violent storm. With the sea too rough for any raft to return to the capital, they are forced to hole up in an empty house to spend the long night. Suddenly, Kaoru has a maidenly panic attack at the idea of spending the night on the same surface as a man, ignoring the simple fact that she's been keeping this guy's flying sword under her roof for months. In the dim light of the cramped sheets, Kaoru watches the swordsman sleep while softly caressing his hand. However, she is consumed by a nightmare in which Kenshin bids her farewell, leaving her behind. The next morning, the storm magically vanishes like a flimsy plot excuse, and Kenshin gifts Kaoru a pink seashell from the sand, proving that any shiny piece of junk from the ground is enough to delay buying an engagement ring.
This is for you, Kaoru.
They set sail, feeling the sea breeze, and return to the capital, only to be greeted by the gang of smiling slackers who were already planted on the bridge, ready to ruin their peace and quiet.